Lilith looked down at the not-so-handsome face resting shamelessly against her chest. A faint, unreadable smile curved her lips as she recalled the chaos of the recent battle. One strike, just one, from the First Order blazing beetle would have been enough to kill Bai Zemin outright. Or, at the very least, cripple him. Yet, through some blend of sheer instinct and brutal luck, he had evaded the beetle's most lethal blows. What injuries he did sustain were caused by shock waves, debris, and the residual energy of the monster's attacks. Time and again, when his life teetered on the edge, Lilith could only clench her fists and watch. Powerless. She hated that feeling. She knew full well how outmatched he had been. No matter how much stronger Bai Zemin was than a typical level 15 evolver, having constantly consumed the soul power of higher-level enemies. There was a chasm between humans and first-order monsters that stats alone couldn't bridge. Unlike humans, who gained stat points with each level up, monsters evolved differently. Their strength exploded with each advancement. No distribution required. Just raw, terrifying power. After the battle, Lilith had led Bai Zemin to a nearby pharmacy building, his unconscious body slumped in her arms. Behind them, the mangled corpse of the beetle lay surrounded by shattered concrete and torn earth, its head nearly severed from its massive body. Lilith gestured at the beast's remains, and a few shimmering objects floated into her hand. She didn't even inspect them, just store them away with a murmur. At the very least, I can do this much. Later, Bai Zemin stirred. Rest had eluded him for long. His body was a battlefield of its own, pain and irritation blooming in every nerve like a swarm of red ants crawling beneath his skin. He opened his eyes slowly and winced. His left eye could finally see again, thanks to the rain washing away the blood. But his vision was blurred and his mind groggy. The blow from that cement block had left a deep sting on his scalp. Then he noticed his ruined boots, his velocity boots, melted and useless. A pang of loss hit him hard. They may have only added plus 10 agility, but in his world, that was the difference between life and death. Looking at his wrist, twisted, bruised, practically broken, he didn't know whether to feel relief or despair. A leg injury would have meant immobility. And in this world, immobility was a death sentence. You finally woke up, sleepyhead. That soft, sweet voice grounded him. He looked up to see Lilith gazing at him with a smile that, for the first time, felt genuine. Good morning. Wait, how long was I out? Panic flashed in his eyes as he tried to sit up, only to collapse with a hiss of pain. His feet burned as if scorched from within. Only about 30 minutes, Lilith reassured him gently. Gritting his teeth, sweat beading on his brow, Bai Zemin growled. Then what's with all this itching? Lilith knelt beside him, her voice calm. You suffered multiple kinds of trauma during your fight with the First-Order monster. Your health stat has increased drastically. High health accelerates recovery. What you're feeling is your body healing faster than you're used to. Curious, Bai Zemin summoned his status window. Status window, Bai Zemin. Level, 20. Race, human. Job, none. Titles, none. Status points, 22. Attributes. Strength, 55 plus 30. Agility, 71 plus 5. Health, 85 plus 5. Stamina, 75 plus 5. Mana, 199 plus 5. Magic, 179 plus 5. Level 20? These stats are mine, he murmured in disbelief. He hadn't known what kind of gains he'd made after defeating the blazing beetle. But this was unreal. Lilith chuckled, her eyes glittering. Your stats are terrifying for someone at your level. I have high hopes for you, Bai Zemin. Please, don't prove me wrong. He met her gaze. I don't intend to. I'll repay you for everything, eventually. He knew better than to assume Lilith's assistance came without strings. A being like her wouldn't waste time on sentiment alone. Still, if their interests aligned, that worked in his favor. You know, she said, pouting playfully, clever men like you aren't always popular. Her expression softened. But don't worry. Our goals will align perfectly in the end. You'll see. If you say so, he replied, rolling his eyes. At present, Only two goals mattered to him: survival and reuniting with his family. Everything else could wait. Suddenly, groaning figures appeared at the building's entrance. Zombies. Their eyes were milky white, their bodies washed clean by rain, making them eerily unthreatening at first glance. Bai Zemin tensed. He tried to stand again. No use. His injuries left him helpless. With a deep breath, he focused his mind and activated his skill, first-order blood manipulation. Bang! 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 10 zombies' eyes burst simultaneously, blood spurting from their sockets. That blood shaped itself into sharp crimson thorns and skewered their brains in a synchronized strike. He let out a breath, but 5 more staggered forward, relentless. Again, he consumed mana to use the blood of the fallen as fuel for new attacks. Though each use cost less now, his reserves were limited. At this pace, he'd be empty and dead soon. Under normal circumstances, a swarm of 200 zombies would be child's play. But now, even these low-level threats were lethal. Lilith observed with concern. She couldn't step in. Her last intervention had been overlooked only because the battle had ended. If she interfered now, the cosmic laws she served might punish her. But something fell off. These zombies shouldn't have arrived so quickly. Many had lost limbs during the battle, crushed under debris. Then she saw it. Someone sprinting through the storm in the opposite direction of the gymnasium. A lone figure. Lilith narrowed her eyes. She didn't recognize them. They weren't part of Bai Zemin's group, which meant one thing. They were the enemy. Bai Zemin made short work of the second wave of undead. The battle itself posed no challenge. The problem was mana. He was still a novice when it came to controlling such power. If he unleashed his full strength in a single burst, he could obliterate his enemies without hesitation, as he had done against the first-order blazing beetle. But precision? Conservation? That was a different beast altogether. To eliminate just 15 low-level zombies, he'd burned through 40 mana points, almost a fifth of his total. With his mana pool capped at 204, this was a costly victory, and fate seemed determined to test his limits. Just as he dispatched the last group, another 10 zombies stumbled toward the entrance. Some tripped over fallen corpses, others bottlenecked in the doorway, snarling and clawing in frustration. Bai Zemin used another 15 mana points to kill the ones that made it through. He deliberately left the rest stuck in the doorway, using them as a makeshift barricade. Still, he frowned. If a mutated beast or an evolved zombie shows up and clears that entrance, I'm done for. Lilith, who had been quietly observing, raised an eyebrow. A knowing, playful smile tugged at her lips. "Looks like you're more loved than you think," she murmured cryptically. Bai Zemin blinked in confusion, until a chilling wind swept through the broken building. The temperature plummeted sharply. Despite the raging storm outside, the air grew even colder. The snarls and groans of the undead suddenly shifted, followed by the sounds of bodies hitting the ground, one after another. 5 minutes later, the zombies stuck in the doorway collapsed in eerie unison. Each of them bore a small, round wound on the back of their skull, frozen clean, sealing the blood inside. Through the shattered entrance, a figure emerged from the storm, clad in white, drenched in rain, and radiating an icy aura. Shangwan Bing Shui strode inside like a frost-forged goddess. Her cold blue eyes scanned the wreckage and then landed on him. They stared at each other in silence. His battered body, her soaked, trembling frame, 2 survivors carrying more than just physical wounds. Then, without a word, she stepped forward. Her lips tightened, her jaw clenched. As if resisting some internal war, she finally crouched beside him and slipped his arm around her neck. He said nothing, but a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes. He'd been ready to kill her with a thought. His first-order blood manipulation would make short work of her body if needed. Yet, she didn't attack. She didn't even speak. She just helped him up. Grimacing, Bai Zemin used his good hand to grab his backpack and plastic bags. Every movement sent sharp pain shooting through his limbs. His feet itched and burned. Blood welled from the corners of his mouth as he gritted his teeth too hard. Still he stood, and she supported him. Her body shivered beneath the touch, soaked through from head to toe. Yet she said nothing, guiding him silently through the rain toward the exit. Outside, Bai Zemin was stunned. Corpses. Everywhere. Over 100 zombies lay scattered like broken dolls, each with a clean wound on their head, sealed by frost. Their blood hadn't even had a chance to spill. She had done this. Alone. Why? They had agreed to separate. He'd gone for medicine while she, Chun-Hee, and Liang Peng were to wait elsewhere. She didn't even like him. So why come here? He glanced at her, but said nothing. Her face remained blank, lips pressed into a thin line, as if holding back more than just words. As they passed the massive carcass of the first-order blazing beetle, she hesitated, almost asked something. But instead, she bit back whatever was on her mind and kept walking. The rain lashed at them mercilessly. The storm showed no signs of relenting, and neither did they. Wordless, driven, they pressed on, two souls fighting their own silent battles. The only advantage? The dense fog from earlier had thinned considerably, burned away by the beetle's flames. At least now they could see. A group of 15 zombies turned a corner, blocking their path. Bai Zemin tensed. Shangwan Bing Shui simply lifted her hand. 15 ice spears materialized and launched like precision-guided missiles. Each one pierced a skull with perfect accuracy. The zombies collapsed in a synchronized heap without even a groan. Barely 20 steps later, a mutated dog with mottled brown fur lunged at them, moving with terrifying speed, at least 30 or 40 agility points. A normal person would be torn apart before they could scream. But Shangwan Bing Shui whispered one word. Freeze. The air around the beast shimmered. Water pooled at its feet crystallized in an instant. Ice bloomed across its fur, crawling upward until the creature was frozen mid-leap, an icy monument to its failure. Bai Zemin couldn't help but feel a stab of envy. Her control over mana was terrifyingly refined. Not a drop wasted. Every move surgical. If only he had that kind of precision. So caught up in admiration, he failed to notice the slight tremor in her voice. She had said just one word, but had cost her dearly. Her breath was shallow. Her legs faltered slightly beneath the weight of both exhaustion and him. She kept walking. By the time they reached the gymnasium, an hour had passed since they'd left for the pharmacy. Both of them were drenched to the bone. Rainwater dripped from their hair, soaked into their boots. But neither collapsed. Neither complained. If they had been ordinary people, they would have died from the exposure alone. But they weren't ordinary anymore. They were survivors. And for now, that was enough.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The atmosphere inside the building was extremely gloomy. The sound of stifled sobs along with whispers containing words of fear and worry could be heard almost everywhere. Some men were comforting beautiful women and vowing to protect them with their lives, thus gaining the favor of those helpless women who had no one else to trust. However, how could those men who did not have the courage to pick up a weapon to fight defend them? But, with the condition the world was in, sometimes even false hope was welcomed with open arms. Among these men was Liang Peng. As one of the few men within this group who not only had the courage to fight, but also possessed the ability to protect others, Liang Peng, who was lustful by nature, was surrounded by a group of 5 female university students. Liang Peng's appearance was not brilliant, and, in fact, he was slightly ugly rather than handsome. However, what the naturally weaker women needed was to survive in this new world. This was something they had realized after a day of witnessing their friends dying before their eyes like flies. Chun-Hee could also be surrounded by beauties if he wanted to, even more than Liang Peng. However, he simply stood in a corner as he looked at Liang Peng with a casual glance. Bang! Suddenly the door opened with a loud bang, drawing everyone's gaze. Each of them praying to God or any saint that no more enemies had appeared. At first, when they saw Shangwan Bing Shui and Bai Zemin, they unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. However, after seeing her supporting him and seeing his staggering footsteps, their expressions were filled with disbelief. especially those people who had been saved by him. He was injured. What creature could have been able to injure him to the point of taking away his capacity to move on his own? How could this be possible? The group of surviving students and teachers began to murmur, and their gazes were filled with terror and apprehension. If there is an existence out there capable of causing Bai Zemin, one of the strongest people in this group, and one of the few who actually had the courage and ability to fight, to be left in such a miserable condition where he couldn't even move on his own, then how are they going to survive? Dread and worries about the future overwhelmed their weak minds once again. Liang Peng also had a slight change in his previously smiling expression and for a moment forgot that he was apparently living the best moment of his life. As for Chunhee, he was stunned for different reasons. Seeing Shengwan Bing Shui supporting Bai Zemin, Chunhee could not believe what he was seeing and for a moment even doubted whether his eyes were working properly. Bing Shui, are you okay? With eyes wide open and full of disbelief, he asked. I'm fine. Shengwan Bing Shui's reply was short and cold as usual. As for Bai Zemin, he couldn't help but look at Chunhee as if he was an idiot. The injured person here who couldn't even move properly was him, not her. Who was he asking then? However, he didn't care too much, and the next second he forgot about it. I won't say thank you since currently that word is even less valuable than it was in the past. Bai Zemin looked at the beautiful woman beside him, who was once again completely soaked because of him, and said in a deep voice, Today it could be said that you got me out of a trouble that could have cost me my life. In the future, I will definitely return the favor to you until I'm even. Without waiting for a response, he gritted his teeth and removed the arm he was using as support on her. Feeling embracing pain under his feet, pain that even freezing water could not alleviate, he began to walk to his place away from everyone. Every step he took was heavy and beads of sweat began to form on his forehead, even though his body was cold. Seeing this, it didn't matter if it was Shengwan Bing Shui, Chunhee, Liang Peng, or the rest of the survivors. They all realized the pain he was feeling at that moment was too great for words to describe. Chunhee seemed to want to say something, but as he looked at Shengwan Bing Shui, he preferred to remain silent. As for Shengwan Bing Shui, she watched his back slowly disappearing at the end of the corridor, and although she really didn't like Bai Zemin, she accepted that at least he was a man with courage and bravery, unlike others. She looked at Liang Peng, and her eyes flashed with disgust, hatred, and disdain as she coldly whispered, You piece of scum. In fact, the reason why Shengwan Bing Shui was alone when she went to find Bai Zemin was because Chunhee had to stay behind to see to it that Liang Peng didn't do something stupid since when she invited the two of them to go find him, Liang Peng was the first to immediately refuse, saying that Bai Zemin had wanted to go out alone on his own. While Liang Peng's words were true, Shengwan Bing Shui had received the highest education in society. Apart from personal talent, she had worked very hard to become what she was today. She, intelligent, could see the bigger picture and knew that Bai Zemin's help would be needed in the long run because regardless of his negative points, he was a good fighter. Therefore, when Liang Peng refused, and upon discovering the almost naked lust in his eyes, Shengwan Bing Shui had no choice but to leave Chunhee here to take care of him and prevent him from doing anything stupid. As for why she didn't stay and let Chunhee go find Bai Zemin, it was because even with her self-control, she had no confidence in putting up with the strong man's stupidities and might end up turning him into an ice statue. Bing Shui, are you really okay? Now that they were finally a little further away from the rest of the people, Chunhee looked at her worriedly and asked. Shengwan Bing Shui did not answer and, as if tired, closed her eyes as she sat down in a corner. Her white dress was completely wet, hugging and outlining the curves of her body, making her even more charming than she naturally already was. Even the gentlemanly and kind Chunhee couldn't help but let his eyes run wild and secretly stole a glance or two before closing his eyes to avoid looking anymore. Countless gazes fell on her and seemed to want to eat her with their eyes, but she had no intention or energy to pay attention to them. She had gotten used to this a long time ago anyway, to the looks of desire, lust, asterisk, 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 F asterisk CK, its mother. Bai Zemin couldn't help but curse as he gritted his teeth and dropped to the ground like a broken rag witut caring about anything but relieving the pressure on his feet. A person could never imagine how horrible the pain of feeling their own skin peeling off and their flesh tearing after being burned by the fire was. Bai Zemin had never in his life experienced such dreadful pain like this, and he never wished to experience it again, if possible. That's what you get for acting all proud. Lilith teased him mercilessly. Still, she reached over and helped him lean back more comfortably against the wall with careful movements. Leave me alone. Bai Zemin rolled his eyes and grunted. His chest rose and fell as he took deep breaths, fighting the pain he felt. I already owe that woman, and I am truly grateful for her help. Whatever her reasons, the fact is that she helped me in my weakest moment. But I do not wish to owe her anything more. You and that woman have known each other before? Lilith asked as she sat down beside him. No. Before the world became this hell, she and I had never interacted and probably never in our lives would have. Bai Zemin closed his eyes and replied quietly, feeling exhausted. Then why do you seem to be so wary of her? Lilith had noticed that while Bai Zemin kept his distance from everyone, he seemed especially guarded against Shangguan Bing Shui. While all the men were enchanted with her in some way or another, Bai Zemin was doing his best to stay away. The more the better. This was something that had confused her until now. So, she decided to ask around to get to know him better since there seemed to be a backstory. That was the reason why Lilith had thought that they had known each other before. Bai Zemin, exhausted, unconsciously replied, All of you, women, are not a good bird. Lilith was surprised by his words. She wanted to ask him what he meant, but when she looked at him, she realized that he had already fallen asleep. The pain was so great that Bai Zemin had immediately fallen asleep as soon as he was in a relatively safe place. After all, he was not only in physical pain. His mind was exhausted beyond words, as he had not yet had a proper rest after fighting a battle in which his life was about to end on several occasions. In fact, he was so tired that he didn't even notice what he had said at the end before he fell unconscious. Although it had only been 5 or 6 hours since he had awakened, the battle to the death against the First Order Blazing Beetle, his first enemy who had actually taken a step on the true path of evolution, Bai Zemin felt as tired as a person who had not slept for 2 days in a row. Therefore, after his exhausted mind and aching body forced him to sleep after reaching a relatively safe place, he was not allowed to wake up until the next day. The world had changed drastically. To say that the previous society had completely collapsed was not an exaggeration in the least, and what all the survivors inside the sports center were hoping for was to get out of this place and get back under the protection of the government and the military. Only then could they feel a little more at ease. None of them knew the situation in which the army equipped with modern weapons was in. The reality was that none of them knew the situation of the outside world. However, for the sake of their own mental health, none of them dared to speak words of despair and even try not to think of the worst possible situation. When Bai Zemin opened his eyes again, the second day since the beginning of the change had ended and the third day had officially begun. The rain stopped. He muttered with still slightly sleepy eyes as he concentrated on the noise outside. The sound of thunder, the illumination of lightning flashing between the small cracks in the window that the timbers could not cover, as well as the fierce sound of water lashing the world as if it were a punishment from the heavens. It had all stopped. A few hours ago, the storm stopped. The reason behind the strange weather in this world was because the sleeping mana could sense the approach of the soul record. Now that the soul record has finally reached this world, things will slowly return to normal. A soft, charming, playful, but also kind voice sounded a few meters away from him. Looking to his left, Bai Zemin saw an extremely beautiful woman sitting elegantly on a table next to the window that was now no longer being covered by a block of wood. The few rays of sunlight that slipped through the clouds surrounded her, creating a great contrast with her black hair and her dark-as-night dress. Without a doubt, this was one of the most beautiful scenes he had ever seen in his entire life. Angel, still half asleep, Bai Zemin couldn't help but mutter, "I'm not an angel. I'm a demon." Lilith gave him the most beautiful smile he had ever seen in all his life. "Good morning." Although her smile was beautiful, To Bai Zemin, it was extremely dangerous. As if he had received an electric shock, he flinched and looked away as he responded, "Good morning to you too." Lilith's eyes had a strange hint flashing within them. She blinked for a few seconds before shaking her head, as if dismissing an idea. "How about your body?" she asked as she approached him with soft steps like a spring breeze. "Now that you mention it." Bai Zemin ignored her as she sat down next to him. He inspected his condition and was pleasantly surprised to find that the wrenching pain he felt yesterday was at least half gone. Although still painful, it was no longer unbearable for him. But what was most surprising was that, after the flesh burned by the beetle's flames fell off, new flesh had begun to grow and skin was slowly forming on the less affected parts. What is this all about? Bai Zemin was dumbfounded. "Didn't I tell you already?" Lilith didn't know whether to laugh or cry, seeing his expression. "Your health is currently several times higher than that of a normal person. If it used to take a person 3 or 4 months to recover from such injuries, you could do it 10 times faster." In fact, with the 90 health points he currently had, his recovery speed was approximately 9 times faster than that of a normal person with no evolution cell reproduction, repair of damaged cells, and regeneration of new tissue. Everything was much faster. At this speed, I only need a couple more days to fully recover. Bai Zemin felt excited and let out a complicated sigh. He felt happy since by recovering quickly, he would finally not have to fear. After all, if another monster similar to the first-order blazing beetle appeared, with his current physical condition, only death would await him. However, in the midst of that happiness, there was a complex emotion as he had finally realized that nothing would be like before. Bai Zemin shook his head softly and looked at Lilith as he stretched out his arms. She raised an eyebrow and teased. "You want me to hug you?" He rolled his eyes and replied, "Give me my damn orbs already." "How do you know?" She looked at him with wide eyes. "Even though I had fallen unconscious at that moment, I know that you won't let go of anything that could help me grow." Bai Zemin said indifferently, "After all, the faster I grow up, the better it will be for you too. Right? A empty set B. Tisk, you really have no good sense of humor." Lilith clicked her tongue and scolded him while pouting cutely. However, the glint in her eyes was one of mirth. As the smarter he was, the greater the odds of surviving and becoming more powerful. "Here, I'll give them back to you, boring man." She waved her hand, and 3 objects floated towards him before falling gently into his lap. Bai Zemin looked at her with jealousy. He too wanted to wave his hand and make things float easily, but it didn't seem to be something that would happen anytime soon. "Where did you get this?" he asked as he looked at her in confusion. She stretched out her right hand gracefully, and without needing to say anything, Bai Zemin's gaze was drawn to a beautiful gold-colored ring with silver runes similar to a wedding ring like the ones Earth people wore. "You're engaged," he teased. "Idiot." She rolled her eyes charmingly and replied, "This is a space storage ring. Inside there's a big space where I can save my stuff, just like in the novels." Bai Zemin nodded with understanding. "How can I have one of those?" How could he not want one? After all, with a ring like Lilith's, he wouldn't need to carry a backpack everywhere, and his general life would become much simpler in this world. If you want one with a large spatial size like this, then forget it. Lilith softly shook her head as she casually said, "This is a legend-grade treasure. Even for you, it's impossible to acquire something of such a level yet." Oh, Bai Zemin couldn't help but be slightly discouraged. Forget legend treasures. He had yet to even see a magic-grade treasure, and his 2 strongest and most precious items were only rare grade. But, seeing him depressed, Lilith continued, "If you're lucky, you might be able to get one of lesser quality. You can also get a green orb, and maybe, just maybe, if your luck is really high, maybe you can get one. Forget it. I'll make do with what I have for now." Bai Zemin no longer entertained the matter of the ring. Such things seemed too far away from someone like him yet. Turning his attention to the objects in his lap, Bai Zemin's eyes lit up with delight, and all the previous bad thoughts completely disappeared without a trace. The first-order blazing beetle had dropped 3 objects, 2 orbs and 1 skill scroll. One of those orbs was orange in color, representing a rare treasure. Surprisingly, the other orb was deep yellow in color. In other words, Bai Zemin had before him an orb that contained a magic-grade treasure. This was his first magic-grade treasure. Although he had just heard something incredible like legend-grade treasures, he had not been discouraged at all since, after seeing how precious his Xianyuan sword and full coat were, he was definitely looking forward to seeing what this orb before him contained. Before seeing the contents of the orb, Bai Zemin felt mischievous and anxious, as if he were a small child about to open his Christmas present. However, he fought the desire and turned his attention first to the orange orb. Let's save the best for last. You're acting like a child. You know that, don't you? Don't distract me. In the midst of light conversation, as if the outside world was still peaceful, and as if the danger of death did not lurk around every corner, Bai Zemin squeezed the orange orb with a bit of strength, and after a flash of light, a new object appeared before him. Honestly, what Bai Zemin was looking forward to was another pair of boots that could replace his previous boots that were destroyed by the flames of the First Order blazing beetle. Unfortunately, things didn't always turn out as one expected. Blazing ring. Rare treasure, a ring that contains the power of burning fire within it. When equipped, magic plus 10 points. Once per day, it can release a flare of fire that can be used to attack or defend. Seeing the deep red ring, Bai Zemin's face turned a little strange. He looked at the beautiful woman a short distance away and slowly asked, "Miss Demon Race, what is this all about?" What do you mean? Lilith blinked at him and looked at him blankly. What do you mean by what do you mean? Bai Zemin didn't know if she was playing innocent or really didn't understand. Therefore, he asked patiently, "Why would a rare orb possess a treasure with magic like this ring?" Who said that objects with magic could only come out of magic-grade orbs? Lilith looked at him with amusement and softly explained, "While it's true that the chances are low from rare-grade treasure onwards, objects like the ring in your hands can appear. It's similar to the case of my space storage ring. Even an epic treasure can contain one, but its grade will be much lower." The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth twitched severely upon hearing her explanation, and this time it wasn't because of pain. In fact, he had assumed that the magic-grade treasures meant objects capable of releasing magic spells. However, he had apparently misunderstood the name of the ranks, attributing those names to the contents of the orbs. With a much more open mind and much more expectant than before, Bai Zemin turned to the deep yellow orb and crushed it. A bronze-colored light flashed, forcing him to close his eyes for a second. When he felt that the brightness had disappeared, Bai Zemin opened his eyes expectantly and looked at the object in his lap. However, when he saw the appearance of the object, his expression turned a little ugly. A bronze-colored pocket bell lay in his lap. This bell was dented in several places, and there was even a part that had been forcibly torn off or had fallen off due to how old it was. Basically, it looked exactly like a useless bell. However, even though the appearance was extremely ugly, Bai Zemin was never one to judge a book by its cover. Although his expression was not very good, his hopes had not been dashed in the slightest, and he picked up the object to inspect it. Broken bronze bell, magic treasure, an ancient bell that was broken and whose current defensive power is practically non-existent. When worn, it automatically increases magic power and mana by 20 points. Effect: when a user is attacked, the bronze bell automatically releases a shield that protects the user from imminent danger. The amount of damage received affects the duration of the effect, and after exhausting all its energy, it takes 24 hours to recharge its power. Bai Zemin's expression was a bit erratic and difficult to describe. On the one hand, he felt happy, but on the other hand, he felt confused. Practically non-existent defensive power. Well, just by looking at the appearance of the bronze bell, he didn't expect much, but that description. Forget it. 20 magic points and 20 mana points is great. He spoke aloud to himself, as if to lift his own mood. Curious, Lilith picked up the broken bell, and green letters flashed at her retina with the object's information. She handed it back to Bai Zemin and assured him, although this bell is broken and its description says that its defensive power is almost non-existent, in reality, it is probably the best treasure you could ever possibly obtain. Oh! His ears twitched gently and his interest piqued. He looked at her with sparkling eyes, waiting for her next words. While the defensive power of this item might not be as strong against evolved beings, against other humans it will be your best ally. Lilith smiled, her eyes glittering strangely. Currently, this world is not especially advanced in technology like other worlds. Therefore, it is likely that forget it, you will see for yourself when the time comes. A with a cute Epsilon. Although she had not finished her words, Bai Zemin felt that he understood what she meant. His mood lifted once again, and he carefully put away the broken bronze bell in the pocket of his full coat. His life had now acquired another layer of protection, which in this world was more than appreciated. Finally, let's see what this is. Bai Zemin picked up the skill scroll, and the information immediately appeared. Elephant Skin, unclassified passive skill, level 5, increases stamina by plus 50 points. To say he wasn't a bit disappointed would be a lie considering he was expecting a much stronger skill. However, 50 stamina points was a huge amount of boost to his strength. Even after so many battles and so many upgrades, Bai Zemin's stamina was only 75 points, not counting the extra 5 from his full coat. Moreover, since it was a passive skill and did not take up space among the few available ones he possessed to learn active skills, this skill was welcome. With a thought, the skill scroll disappeared and several particles of gray light entered his body. Deep within his soul, a dull gray rune formed, and Bai Zemin felt his entire body suddenly become much harder and tougher than in the past. However, before he could think of anything else, several green letters flashed across his retina. Evolution requirements fulfilled. Do you wish to evolve Elephant Skin skill to the next level? Bai Zemin was dumbfounded. What happened? He hadn't even done anything, and it hadn't even been 2 seconds since he learned the skill, but it could already be evolved to the next level? Lilith, looks like I can evolve a skill, he said in a weird tone. You probably fulfilled some relatively easy requirement. Lilith wasn't sure either. Focus on that skill, and look at the evolution requirement to confirm it. Bai Zemin nodded and quickly looked at his newly acquired skill. Elephant Skin, unclassified passive skill, level 5. This skill is at its maximum level and can evolve to the next level if the following requirements are met. Stamina stat above 100 points naturally without external support. 125 out of 100. Requirements met. Do you wish to evolve the skill Elephant Skin to the next level? Apparently, each skill had different difficulties to evolve. At least for Bai Zemin, it didn't seem difficult at all to reach 100 points in a stat. However, when he told Lilith the evolution requirement, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she said, "You little brat, do you think it's easy for a person of your level to reach and surpass 100 points in stats? While there have been more people who have achieved that, there aren't many. Besides, you're the first living creature I know in the universe's history who is able to evolve a skill so fast." Bai Zemin felt happy at her words, but he did not let that happiness go to his head. While he might be the first to evolve a skill so fast according to Lilith's knowledge, it was just an unclassified passive skill, so Bai Zemin did not believe that his act was something incredible. Of course, Bai Zemin had no idea that Lilith was comparing him to monsters like the God of the Bible that Christians worshipped, or else his thoughts would not be so simple. The real reason why Bai Zemin did not feel that such an achievement was a big deal was mainly because he was only evolving an unclassified to first-order skill. It was not as if he was evolving a particularly powerful skill by any stretch of the imagination. Furthermore, while it was true that Bai Zemin's stamina had reached 125 natural points without external support, the reality was that almost half of those points came from the Elephant Skin skill itself. Of course, even with all the aforementioned, the fact that he could achieve so many stamina enhancements in just over 2 days was the real achievement. Lilith had never met or heard of another existence capable of improving so quickly. With a single thought, the Elephant Skin skill began to evolve. The dull gray rune that was engraved deep within Bai Zemin's soul lit up. Countless flashes of lightning flickered from deep within him, and his entire body began to heat up as a strange tickle-like, but not so unbearable feeling was transmitted through every millimeter of his skin. After several minutes, The lightning flashing inside his body receded and was absorbed by the rune from which it came before. However, the once dull gray rune had now become a deep bronze rune. Elephant Skin, unclassified passive skill. Level 5, Bronze Skin, first order passive skill, level 1. Bronze Skin, first order passive skill, level 1. Your skin becomes much tougher than that of any living being on Earth before the awakening of mana. Increases stamina plus 100 points. Bai Zemin was grinning from ear to ear as he looked at his 180 total stamina points. He could feel practically unlimited energy from his body, and the feeling of becoming stronger once again excited him to the point of forgetting about his injuries. You should be careful now that you have such monstrous stamina, Lilith said out of nowhere, dragging Bai Zemin out of his daydream. What? Why? He looked at her with some alarm. Could it be that there was really something bad? Maybe it was because his stats were a little off balance? After all, Bai Zemin's stamina stat was his current highest physical stat, and by a wide margin. Maybe the body needed to balance itself somehow. Lilith looked at him with a serious expression and slowly said, "Well, your current stamina is almost 20 times higher than that of a normal man and woman. Imagine what would happen if you suddenly decided to unleash your libido wildly on a woman's body. The poor girl would probably be devastated." Bai Zemin's face rotted when he heard her words. She thought he was a sex machine or something like that. With his face as black as coal, Bai Zemin gritted his teeth and bellowed, "I swear I'll kick your ass someday." Ha ha! Seeing him gritting his teeth and looking at her as if he wanted to bite her to death, Lilith felt so amused that she started to laugh out loud. This was the first time she thought that a lower existence was so interesting. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 3 days later, the 6th day since the mana was awakened by the soul record. During these 3 days, Bai Zemin did not leave the cafeteria and closed the door firmly, isolating himself from the rest of the people. Except for eating and drinking, Bai Zemin's only entertainment was chatting with the beautiful and charming succubus Lilith. Fortunately, due to constant evolutions, his digestive system was no longer as problematic as that of a normal person. In this time, he focused on recovering from his injuries without doing anything else. In addition, to avoid any kind of trouble, Bai Zemin had talked to Chun-Hee and asked him to take all the food out of the cafeteria, leaving only what he needed for himself and a bit for emergencies. This way, he did not have to be in contact with people he did not know and did not trust while he was still injured. Bai Zemin stood up and stomped on the ground several times as if checking something. The wounds on my feet and legs healed completely. He nodded in satisfaction and relief. Now, even if a second monster similar to the First Order Blazing Beetle appeared, he was confident that at least his chances of victory weren't practically non-existent like when he was injured and unable to move. Beta. The only problem was that his left wrist was still broken. However, he only needed to use his right hand to wield the Xinyuan sword, so he was temporarily fine. Bai Zemin estimated that he would need at least another 7 days for his wrist bones to fully recover. Although 7 days was quite a long time, and his strength would be affected as a result of not being able to use both hands at the same time, this result was already good enough considering that in normal cases a person would need 2 to 3 months to recover from a bone fracture. Let's see how things are going outside. Besides, I have a debt to pay. His eyes flashed coldly as he opened the cafeteria door for the first time in 3 days. When you act mad, you look hot. Lilith, as beautiful and charming as ever, walked behind him as if she was his shadow. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Unlike 3 days ago, the mood inside the gymnasium had not improved in any way. On the contrary, the hope of many students and teachers began to flicker. The cold and fever medicines that Bai Zemin had obtained from the pharmacy had already been distributed by Shangguan Bing Shui and the help of other teachers. Therefore, those who were sick had improved a lot, and those who were about to get sick were able to avoid illness successfully. Each one of the survivors had been well fed, and while it was true that the food was no longer as luxurious or extravagant as in the past, at least all of them were able to have 3 meals a day without fail. However, even under such conditions countless times more luxurious than that of who knew how many people who at the moment could only hide in some dark corner without food. The hope of all the survivors in the gym was shaken. The reason? They who were waiting for the arrival of the military army, or at the very least, the support of the police forces, had not yet even heard the sound of a siren. In the gymnasium, there was also a big screen, but there was no news and all the channels were dead. As for the radio, it had also collapsed as well as the phone signal. Bai Zemin caught the erratic eyes of the people, and when they saw him appear, walking, some sighed in relief that the group's strength was rising while others had no apparent reaction. However, the most surprised of them was Shangwan Bing Shui. She looked at him, and her beautiful blue eyes had a strange glint in them. "Are your wounds okay now?" she asked with clear surprise in her usually indifferent voice. This shocked Shun He to the marrow of his bones, and his eyes widened in astonishment. In fact, his surprise was no less than when the soul record displayed his status window the first time. She was worried about him? But how could such a thing be possible? Didn't they just meet? Didn't they dislike each other? Chun's head was full of unanswered questions. While the handsome Chun, he looked at Shangwan Bing Shui with surprise, and Bai Zemin with caution, he actually did not know that the reason she asked that question was not that she cared about him. It was because she had seen how severe the burns on his feet were. With such dreadful burns, Shangwan Bing Shui had figured that it would at least take him 2 months to walk completely naturally again. After all, Bai Zemin's level was obviously not low. Although he had not said anything, and she had not asked, Shangwan Bing Shui was almost 100% sure that that 3-meter-tall beetle had been killed by him. A person capable of killing such a hideous monster could not have a low level. However, what Shangwan Bing Shui did not expect was that only 4 days later, Bai Zemin would appear again as if his previous wounds had never existed. What kind of a mortal monster was this? "My wounds are fine now. Thank you for asking." Bai Zemin took a moment to look at the faces of the people in front of him before looking at Shangwan Bing Shui and replying. Hearing that he was indeed fine and confirming it through his natural voice, Shangwan Bing Shui's eyes had a strange glint in them after confirming that his wounds had effectively healed. "I see." She only nodded before looking at Chun He silently. The talented archer understood the intention behind her gaze and slowly began to explain to Bai Zemin the situation. During the past 3 days when you were recovering, the condition of the sick due to the low temperatures of their bodies improved with the help of the General Kale faction. Thank you for that. He honestly thanked on behalf of the rest of the survivors. Soon, however, he frowned and continued, "But there's another problem at present." Bai Zemin was not surprised. He nodded slightly and finished his words instead. "The food is running low, isn't it?" "That's right." Chun sighed and scratched his head in frustration. "Currently, because we didn't want to make the situation any worse than it already is, we let everyone eat their fill. The problem is that now the reserved food finally ran out. We can only last until tomorrow." Liang Peng, who had been silent with his big hammer, interrupted. "Then why don't we just go get some more? Those zombies are slow as hell, and those dogs and cats may be fast, but they're too dumb. I don't think we'll have a problem if we all move together. In fact, I'm afraid we have no choice but to go out and forage for food at the university restaurants." Chun had no choice but to say yes. Food was an indispensable resource that could not be missed. Even the strongest evolvers had no choice but to eat to provide nutrients that the body needed but did not produce naturally. Without food, everyone would weaken to the point where lifting a single finger would be a challenge. Moreover, the chaos resulting from starvation was something no one was willing to let happen. Besides, Kai Jingyi, the same girl who had met Bai Zemin at the beginning of the apocalypse, suddenly seemed to gather the courage to speak. Although she felt a little self-conscious under everyone's gaze, she continued, "If possible, it would also be good if we can get clothes. Actually, since there are male and female changing rooms for showering, hygiene is not much of a problem. However, after almost a week of wearing the same clothes, it is starting to become a bit unbearable. We will definitely get more clothes." Shangwan Bing Shui was the first to agree as she frowned slightly. Although her clothes were free of dirt stains and her white dress along with her silver hair made her look like an angel, the truth was that after not being able to change even once in 6 days, her mood was not the best. The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth twitched a couple of times, but he said nothing. Even he did not feel comfortable with the current situation, not to mention the women who were by nature beings who constantly worried about cleanliness. Seeing that no one disagreed with her words, Kaijingi couldn't help but sigh in relief. By the way, taking advantage of the momentary silence, Bai Zemin looked at Chun, and casually asked, "The army, the government, the police forces? No word on this." Hearing his question, Liang Peng, Kaijingi, and a few teachers present looked at Chun, waiting for his answer. Nothing. Chun shook his head to no one's surprise. But a bespectacled teacher interrupted with an anxious expression. "Young Master Chun, your Chun family is a big family with power in the army, and your father a regimental commander. Shouldn't they send someone for you at least?" Bai Zemin couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Family with military backing? Regimental commander? He hadn't expected Chun to have such a background. To think that this handsome guy's father was actually a veteran soldier with military rank colonel. Bai Zemin had a strange glint, and his gaze could not help but shift slightly towards Shangwan Bingshui. Then, her background should be similar or superior to Chun-He's. Chun-He's face changed slightly, but soon returned to normal. He looked at Shangwan Bingshui for a moment before sighing. "Indeed, I was hoping that my family would get here soon, but apparently the situation is far worse than we all thought. How can that be possible?" The teacher who had spoken earlier looked desperate, and his face lost all color. If even an important person like Chun had been practically abandoned to his fate by his own family, how could they, people with no real backing, expect support from the government or the army? It was nothing but wishful thinking. They all looked desperate for a moment. The only two people whose expression remained unchanged were the indifferent Shangwan Bingshui and Liang Peng, who was casually looking around. Even Bai Zemin's expression turned a bit ugly, not because of the lack of military or governmental response, but because of his family. The worse the situation was outside, the less likely it was that his family would survive amidst such chaos. Alpha Nui, they have to be okay. No matter what, definitely nothing could happen to them. Bai Zemin clenched his fists, ignoring the pain in his left hand. Every time he thought about his family, his heart squeezed hard as if a giant stone was pressing down on it. However, no matter how much he wanted to see them and run out to find them, he couldn't do that. As strong as he was, Bai Zemin did not know what kind of dangers dwelled outside this place, and he was not arrogant enough to believe that his strength was enough to overcome them all. "Then, let's go find the food we can," Bai Zemin said coldly. His tone of voice lacked emotion. However, there should be some changes from now on. Everyone looked at him in surprise, noticing the change in his eyes, and his indifferent voice seemed to hold a higher weight than in the past. While Bai Zemin was previously indifferent, his current indifference contained several degrees of coldness that was not there before. "What do you mean?" Shangwan Bingshui furrowed her eyebrows slightly, also secretly surprised by the abrupt change. Bai Zemin looked at her and slowly explained, "From now on, those who are unwilling to help in any way will only be able to eat enough to not starve. To be honest, I have no time to waste with leeches here. If no one is willing to move to advance and get out of this damn place, then I will start moving on my own with people who really want to get out of this hellhole. But I definitely won't get dragged down by anyone." Lilith, who was visible only to Bai Zemin, stood silently beside him. When she heard his words, her eyes glittered and a silent smile rose on her lips. From a certain point of view, it could be said that this was the first major change in Bai Zemin after the world had changed. He had already saved many people out of kindness, but if they wanted to keep him using that kindness, then he would abandon them without even a second thought. To him, his family was everything. As long as he had such an impulse, then he would not be held back by anything. Lilith's only worry was that if Bai Zemin's family did not survive, it was probable that he would not be able to rally a motive to fight for. Therefore, she had to think of countermeasures. No matter what, she couldn't just let him fall in this place. Wait a moment." Liang Peng raised his voice and looked at Bai Zemin with wide eyes. "Are you crazy?" Bai Zemin casually looked him up and down before looking him in the eyes and asking coldly, "And you are what?" "My previous words were not a question." What I said is what will happen, whether you like it or not. You don't have a choice here. Bai Zemin's words stunned everyone present. Regardless of whether they were teachers or students, the people able to participate in this small meeting and express their opinions stared straight ahead with blank expressions. Shangwan Bing Shui frowned and suddenly felt that there was something wrong with this situation. Her brain was like a supercomputer, remembering what had just happened, and soon her eyes flashed softly as if she had finally understood everything. Chun He, who always had a calm expression on his face, could not help but gasp in a breath of cold air as he looked at Bai Zemin as if he was an unidentified alien. Until now, although the time they spent together was not much, Chun He had identified Bai Zemin as a person who enjoyed loneliness more than the company of others and was usually quite calm. Therefore, now that he saw him go crazy and say such arrogant words, he did not know how to react. Moreover, Chun He had seen how terrifying Liang Peng's strength was during the first day of the apocalypse after the arrival of the Soul Record to this world. A single blow from his hammer was enough to turn a zombie's body into a pile of meat paste. What arrogance, brat! Liang Peng's eyes opened as wide as those of an enraged bull. His beard quivered, and he looked at Bai Zemin as if he was going to jump on him at any moment. Liang Peng had seen Bai Zemin's speed back then when he decapitated zombies. Although he was fast, Liang Peng believed that at such a distance he only needed to stretch out a hand to crush him like an ant. Such was the confidence in his physical strength. Bai Zemin's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness as he looked at the man who was like a small giant. His current mood was gloomy, to say the least. As if that wasn't enough, his left hand was still hurting, his family might be suffering from hunger or who knows what kind of hardship. Since this person does not understand in a good way, and words could not reach him, a bit of pain might make him understand the meaning of the word terror. Bai Zemin took a step forward and was about to make his move when a cold but beautiful voice stopped him. Okay, let's do as you say. Everyone looked at Shangwan Bing Shui in surprise and disbelief. Even Bai Zemin himself was surprised that this woman agreed with his words so easily and without argument. Bing Shui, are you sure of what you were saying? Chun He looked at his childhood friend in shock. It was no secret to anyone that he had been in love with her for years. Therefore, he knew very well that she was an intelligent woman. However, he did not understand why she had accepted such an idea that was clearly not good at the moment. Shangwan Bing Shui gently shook her head, but did not explain anything. Among those present, only she had noticed that Bai Zemin's mood was on the floor, and if it wasn't for her interrupting just in time, it was likely that things would have gotten out of hand. Right now, the last thing they needed were internal battles. While I agree with what you said, I need you to explain better what you have in mind. Otherwise, no one will accept such a wild idea like that. Shangwan Bing Shui looked at Bai Zemin indifferently and slowly explained. At this point, everyone's mood is not good. The situation of the unknown world is getting worse and worse. If we suddenly tell them that their meals will be cut off, no one will accept it willingly. Bai Zemin looked at her and took a deep breath to calm down a bit before speaking slowly. Of course, what I want is not for everyone to suddenly have the courage to fight. I know something like that is illogical. Noticing that things had calmed down, the teachers present, Kai Jingyi, and Chun He secretly let out a sigh of relief. As for Liang Peng, he only snorted and remained silent as he listened to what Bai Zemin had to say about it. Shangwan Bing Shui nodded and indicated with her eyes for him to continue explaining his idea. If Bai Zemin had asked everyone to fight in order to eat, then even if the strength of the group fell, she would have no choice but to ask him to left alone. After all, very few people were willing to risk their lives, and the human mentality had not yet completely changed to adapt to the new world. Bai Zemin continued, "My idea is simple. After we find food, the students and teachers who are unable to fight will carry it. In addition, when we look for clothes or other useful items, these people will also help. I also think it would be good to get some beds. In short, whatever is logistical support and does not require risking life and death. All those who want to eat their fill should cooperate." After a moment of silence, the handsome Chun He was the first to open his mouth. "I agree. That idea is good enough." "I agree as well." Shangwan Bing Shui finally nodded in perfect accord. In the end, everyone accepted Bai Zemin's suggestion. While some of them might not be satisfied, 3 of the 4 fighters in the group had already made up their minds, so those without fighting ability could only accept their fate. When the new rules were announced, many people complained loudly, and some of them even began to curse. However, when Bai Zemin said that those who disagreed and all those who continued to make a fuss should leave the group, all the courage of these people disappeared completely, and no one else was willing to complain for fear to be kicked out of the group. What a joke! As weak as they were, being expelled from the group and the protection of those with real power was no different to courting death. Bai Zemin looked at the more than 100 people present, and an idea flashed in his mind. It was a bit annoying, but in the long run, it might be his best help in finding his loved ones. With this in mind, he stepped forward and said aloud, "I know many of you are afraid of being scratched by those zombies, as most of you here have probably seen the aftermath. However, you don't need to be so scared. Those zombies are even slower than a normal person like you. So imagine how slow they are for people like me and everyone else who have leveled up by absorbing the enemy's soul power." The eyes of several people had a strange glint in them upon hearing this. Indeed, zombies were slow, and if one was careful, even a normal person could kill a zombie. However, it was not easy to overcome the fear, let alone knowing that zombies were not the only danger. But Bai Zemin's next words changed things. "I will personally hunt zombies, cut off their legs and arms, even crush their jaws. You just need to have the courage to pick up a weapon and finish them off to gain soul power and level up." People began to murmur and stare at each other as they argued amongst themselves. Clearly, there were many tempted by the offer. After all, without their hands, legs, and without their teeth, the zombies were nothing to fear. None of them were really willing to die, and there were many of them who didn't want to do more embarrassing jobs for fear of fighting. However, at the end of the day, fear was one of the strongest human emotions. After a minute, no one stood up, and everyone was silent. While Bai Zemin's words were tempting, no one was willing to risk their lives just like that. Even if the zombies were incapacitated by him, there were still terrifying insects and other horrible beasts that could emerge from anywhere at any time. Asking them to pick up a weapon to fight after living almost 20 years or more in a peaceful society under the protection of rules, laws, and their parents was no different than asking them to walk naked down the street in broad daylight. It might sound easy, but no one in their right mind was willing to do something like that. However, these people forgot that sense had already disappeared and that the mentality of the past no longer applied in this new world. Unfortunately, by the time many of them realized this fact, it would be too late to regret it. Liang Peng folded his arms and looked at the scene with a mocking expression. He was casual, unconcerned about what was happening in front of him. Shangguan Bing Shui had a strange glint in her eyes and looked at the women present, seemingly thinking about something. "Since you are unwilling, then you can continue to be trash for the rest of your lives." Bai Zemin looked at the crowd coldly and snorted. However, just when he was about to turn around and leave, a soft voice took him by surprise. "I'll go with you." Bai Zemin looked to the side and saw the pretty but normally shy and fearful Kai Jingyi looking at him with a serious expression. She gritted her teeth softly and continued, "Please let me go with you to kill zombies." Kai Jingyi was a smart woman and knew that although they were currently being protected, if a problem that Shangguan Bing Shui, Chunhe, Liang Peng, or Bai Zemin could not solve arose, just by having strength of her own, her chances of surviving in this world would be higher. Otherwise, it was only a matter of time before she would die for some reason or another. When a rock fell on a silent lake, waves always appeared, no matter how small they were. "Let me come with you. I want to kill zombies too." A young man around 19 years old, wearing glasses and whose body was thin, stood up and took a step forward. "I also want to level up. Let me go with you, please." Another young man in his 20s stood up and looked at Bai Zemin with determination. "I'll go with you." A pretty female student with some freckles also stood up while gritting her teeth. Although her body shivered with fear, she still decided to step forward. "Only 4 of them, huh? It will do for now." Bai Zemin thought silently and a smile raised softly on his face as his eyes scanned the 4 people who had the courage to step forward. Sometimes human beings just needed a little push to dare to do things they normally would have never even thought to do. There are even 2 women here who had the courage to stand up, but you, who call yourselves men, don't have the courage to take a step forward? Bai Zemin looked at the male students and even the male teachers with undisguised disdain. Hearing his words, all the men on the scene who did not dare to step forward blushed so much that it seemed like all the blood in their bodies had rushed up to their heads. However, none of them dared to look him back, and, of course, none of them dared to step forward. On the other hand, the 2 male students who had the courage to step forward could not help but straighten their backs a little more. Even the glasses-wearing and slightly skinny student had more courage than men with bulky bodies. Bai Zemin no longer wasted his time with these people. They themselves would soon regret the opportunity they had just missed. Is it all right with you guys if we go out to look for food now? Bai Zemin looked at the other 3 leaders and asked. Fine with me. Chunyi nodded and picked up his bow as he looked at the woman beside him. Shangwan Bing Shui simply stood up and walked toward the exit without saying anything. As for Liang Peng, he just snorted as he picked up his hammer and followed the other 2 without saying a word, clearly still upset about what had happened earlier. Bai Zemin looked at the 4 people who decided to follow him and slowly said, You 4 follow me. You don't need to carry anything, but you should mentally prepare yourselves for what's coming. The 4 nodded, quickly indicating that they understood. Seeing this, Bai Zemin turned around and walked out with the 4 students behind him. Everyone, please follow closely behind President Shangwan's group and the rest. I hope we all contribute a little bit of each other to improve everyone's lives. Teacher Jia Jiao clapped her hands and tried to raise everyone's spirits. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The group led by Bai Zemin, Chun He, Shangwan Bing Shui, and Liang Peng walked slowly and with looks full of precaution as they escorted over 20 male and female students. Taking out over 100 people and protecting them all was an incredibly difficult task to accomplish. After all, unknown dangers lurked around every corner, and slow zombies were the least of the worries of people who had been absorbing the enemy soul power and constantly leveling up. But the danger of high-level mutated animals or evolved insects was much higher and was something that even they dared not take easily. Therefore, to prevent unnecessary losses and to make the job simpler for themselves, the 4 of them had decided to bring a few more than 20 people to carry the food on this occasion. Of course, the pretty and shy freshman, Kai Jingyi, had registered all the people who were willing to go out and work, but did not have the opportunity this time. These people could eat freely and would be mobilized in the near future. As for those who were not willing to work, they could only eat what was necessary to not starve. The world had changed, and the old rules no longer applied. Slowly but surely, there would be necessary changes that would be implemented over time. This was only the first of many more to come. The 4 evolved people were divided into 4 parts, each protecting one side of the rhombus in which the more than 20 people were enclosed. Liang Peng, whose strength was monstrous, was in charge of the front. When the zombies approached, he would charge forward and needed only a swing of his hammer to turn that zombie into a bloody mess. Although his hunting method scared many students, the reality was that it worked well. Shangwan Bing Shui, whose ability to control ice and move it at will was incredibly strong, was in charge of protecting the right of the diamond. Whenever a zombie came too close, an ice spike would appear above its head and pierce its brain silently. A with the cute new ES. Shangwan Bing Shui's hunting method was extremely beautiful. Not even a drop of blood fell to the ground, and the ice fragments floating in the air were extremely charming. Not even a single zombie managed to show any signs of breaking through her defenses. Chun He, who was at the back of the group, was probably the most relaxed person at the moment. His right hand was holding an arrow, and his left hand was tightly gripping his bow. When a zombie escaped Liang Peng's range due to his normal speed, Chunyi casually shot an arrow, and the walking corpse fell to the ground with a wound on its forehead. Bai Zemin, who was in charge of protecting the left side of the group, silently looked on as a zombie slowly crawled out of a building dragging its feet and approached towards the group. They really are slow. He couldn't help but shook his head softly. After so many upgrades to his agility stat, zombies were like moving turtles from his point of view. However, although to Bai Zemin they were slow and not much of a challenge, from the point of view of the other survivors, they were extremely terrifying creatures. When they saw the zombie's dead eyes and the amount of bloody wounds on its body, as well as its yellowish teeth full of human flesh or any other living thing stuck in between, it didn't matter if it was male or female. They all shuddered in terror. Many of them even began to sob silently. In fact, the sound that could be heard most in the group was the restrained cries of the people. They, who had been living safely for 6 days without having to see such creatures, were again forced to remember that the present world was no longer the world they knew. Who wants to go first? Bai Zemin looked at Kai Jingyi and the other 3 students as he spoke in a deep voice. I'll hunt them down for you. You just need to give them the final strike and enjoy the benefits. Easy. Don't let me be disappointed. Opportunities like this won't always come. Although the 4 of them gathered the courage to move forward at that time, when facing the zombie face to face, it was natural to feel fear. Therefore, after several seconds, none of them spoke. Just as Bai Zemin's face was beginning to turn ugly, one of the students slowly raised his hand and in a trembling voice asked, let me do it first. It was a bit of a surprise for Bai Zemin to see that the first person was actually the thin student with glasses. This guy was average in every aspect, and his body was even weaker than that of a normal young adult without evolving through soul power absorption. However, his courage was commendable. What's your name? Bai Zemin looked at him for a moment and asked. It's Fu Xiefeng. The glasses-wearing student quickly announced, his eyes looking at the zombie that was slowly but surely approaching, and, though his weak body quivered in fear, he took a step forward and asked in a low voice, Big Brother Bai, I wonder if I can ask you something? Oh, Bai Zemin narrowed his eyes. He was already doing everything he possibly could, but this person wanted more? However, he didn't immediately burst out and asked slowly, Tell me, what is it about? Fu Xiefeng took a deep breath and, while looking at the zombie, said words that surprised Bai Zemin. I hope you will lend me your sword and let me kill that zombie with my own hands. No help, just me. Although his voice was quite low, the group was not big, therefore many heard his request. Most looked at him in shock and disbelief, others looked at him with indifference, and others looked at him with pity as if they were already looking at a dead man. You're as thin as a bamboo pole, but you want to show off? Many of the men who had been mocked by Zemin's words felt that they could finally vent the bad smell and secretly sneered. Okay, since you have so much resolve and courage, you can do it all by yourself. Bai Zemin's eyes flashed strangely, and without another word, he handed the Xian Yuan's sword to Fu Xiefeng silently. This, incredible. Fu Xiefeng immediately felt the huge boost of strength rushing through his body after the sword ring by strange runes touched his hands. He, who was always considered the weakest, at this moment felt that he could break the bones of even the strongest student. Under the surprised and scared gaze of many, Fu Xiefeng took a deep breath, and while observing the zombie, less than 10 meters away, he tightened his grip on the wielding hilt of the sword. Although his strength stat had gone up dramatically thanks to the treasure in his hands, all of his remaining stats were even below average and average at best. Besides, the fact that one scratch was all he needed to receive for his life to be over was something he knew perfectly well. Nevertheless, Fu Xiefeng gritted his teeth until his lingual gums bled before stepping forward. Bai Zemin watched all this with flashing eyes. He was going to give the sword to the 4 students after hunting the zombies, but Fu Xiefeng's request was something he did not expect. Fu Xiefeng was scared. Of course, he was obviously scared. However, he fought against the panic and forcibly suppressed his instincts to retreat. His whole body, every cell seemed to be begging him not to do so and to step back where he knew he would be protected. Fu Xiefeng could feel the stares of the other survivors prickling his back. Pity, mockery, disdain, wonder, disbelief, surprise, and many other looks with different meanings. However, he endured. The reason he endured all this, in reality, It was a very simple reason, and for many, it might not be anything special. The only thing he wanted was to be able to raise his head at least once in his life. Since he was young, due to his weak constitution and as a consequence of his below-average appearance, he was always ridiculed in different ways. Fu Xuefan, who came from a hard-working family, also wanted his parents to be proud of him. Now that the world had changed, he longed to be able to change his life, and if they were still alive, to be able to give his parents a source of security on which they could rely in times of need. Now that a powerful person like Bai Zemin had stretched out a helping hand to him, Fu Xiefeng was willing to do anything to hold on to it. As the zombie slowly approached, Fu Xiefeng could feel his legs trembling. Still, he too advanced slowly and began to circle around the zombie, studying the creature's movements carefully. Due to Bai Zemin's actions, the whole group had no choice but to stop momentarily, and everyone's attention had been focused on what was happening on the left side of the small human rhombus. And now what? Liang Peng asked in frustration as he surveyed the scene. Chenny didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw Bai Zemin's reckless actions. His move practically forced everyone to stop in a place where they could be attacked at any moment. However, the only person present other than Bai Zemin himself who knew the reason why he was so calm was Shangguan Bingshui. She, who had practically saved his life 3 days ago, knew that very close to this place was the battlefield where the huge beetle lay dead. All the dangerous creatures nearby had been crushed by the beetle, decapitated by Bai Zemin, or had their brains crushed and frozen by Shangguan Bingshui herself. Therefore, the only temporary danger was some straggling zombies that definitely did not reach 100. After nearly 2 minutes of circling the zombie, Fu Xiefeng finally calmed down a bit and realized that Bai Zemin's words were completely true. These apocalyptic creatures were incredibly slow. Suddenly, Fu Xiefeng dashed to the right, causing the zombie to slowly start turning around. However, his previous move was just a feint, and he quickly moved to the left, confusing the zombie for a moment. Fu Xiefeng raised his sword high in the air and slashed down with all his might, shouting to shake off his fears. Unfortunately, he couldn't concentrate due to his fear, so the sword sliced off one of the zombie's arms instead of falling on its head. However, he was not sad or disappointed. On the contrary, he was delighted, because he had finally realized that as long as he was a little careful, these mindless zombies were not as dangerous as he thought. Taking advantage of the zombie's weakened side due to the loss of a limb, Fu Xiefeng silently slipped behind the zombie, and with a strong slash without much skill, he easily hacked off the infected creature's head. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie level 3. Stamina plus 3. You have leveled up to level 2. You have received 2 status points to distribute freely. As the zombie's body fell forward and blood stained the ground, Fu Xiefeng was surprised when several green letters flashed in his retina. In the end, the 19-year-old was so shocked that he stood there in a daze. Congratulations on officially entering the path of evolution. Bai Zemin's voice snapped him out of his surprise. He looked at him and asked, I did. N. Bai Zemin didn't know whether to laugh or cry, seeing the guy's dumbfounded face. In a serious voice, he said, If it wasn't you who did it, then who was it? I did it. I did it. Ha ha ha. I finally killed my first zombie. Fu Xiefeng shouted without caring whether he attracted another monster or not. Bai Zemin simply looked at him, but did not stop him. This guy was not only expressing his joy, but he was also shouting to shake off the lingering fear that still remained in him. After all, it wasn't easy to step forward to battle against death when you know that someone else was willing to do it for you. Moreover, none of those present mocked Fu Xiefeng's childish attitude. On the contrary, they all looked at him with astonishment and disbelief, while the looks of ridicule and disdain were long gone. Fu Xiefeng suddenly ran forward and picked up a white scroll that had fallen from the zombie. Although he hesitated for a moment after knowing what it was, he gritted his teeth and walked toward Bai Zemin as he said, Big brother Bai, this skill, I give it to you. You give it to me? Bai Zemin picked up the scroll in a daze. He definitely did not expect this move. Stealth, first order active skill. Level 1. Erases your presence, to some extent, while weakening your body smell and the sound of your heart. It costs 10 mana points to activate and takes 4 stamina points per minute to keep activated. After deactivation, it has a cooldown time of 20 minutes. I give it to you. You use it. Bai Zemin handed the scroll back to him and shook his head. He looked at him with appreciation and said, "Anyway, I never thought of taking what rightfully belonged to you. However, I like grateful people like you. I just hope you can continue to be like that and not get carried away by the emotion of the moment. Don't worry, big brother Bai. Although my family may be poor, my parents taught me values. Favor with favor is repaid, and this favor is so great that I will never forget it." Fu Xiefeng clenched the skill scroll tightly and looked at Bai Zemin with eyes brimming with gratitude. Not only had Bai Zemin given him the courage he needed to fight, but he also spoke to him with respect and had even allowed him to keep a supernatural skill like the one in his hands. In this world where the strong devoured and fed on the weak, a skill, as useless as it seemed, was no different than possessing another life-saving source in times of need. Go get some rest for now. Also, I advise you to add your status points to agility and stamina. That way, with your stealth skill, you could become a terrific assassin. Bai Zemin gently patted his shoulder and advised honestly. Without hesitation, Fu Xiefeng wished to learn the skill just as Bai Zemin had told him. Then, he silently handed the sword back to him before returning to the crowd with his back straight. Those who had previously glared at him now did not dare to stare at him for more than a second before looking away. Now that his initial fear was gone, as long as Fu Xiefeng maintained that courage, and as long as he was on good terms with one of the 4 main leaders of this group, his strength would only increase more and more. No one was foolish enough to look for trouble where there was none against such a person. "You're a mind manipulator," Lilith sneered beside him. However, even though it seemed like she was mocking, her eyes glittered with appreciation as she said, "Inflict fear first, then embarrass him with your previous talk to push them forward. Finally give him power and respect. Kia, little Zemin, big sister loves you more and more." Bai Zemin smiled slightly before turning around and walking back. Indeed, Lilith was right. What he was doing was manipulation. Right now, Bai Zemin might be much stronger than most. However, even he was not able to fight against thousands of zombies. His stamina would be drained sooner no matter how high it was. Therefore, he urgently needed people able to follow him willingly, people able to become his sword. Lilith was also delighted that Bai Zemin had understood this so soon. After all, even she herself was not invincible, let alone he who had barely taken his first steps in this new world of evolution and death. Besides, Bai Zemin's move also suited what Lilith needed and was a first step to what she hoped he could one day become. The group of people soon left the corpse of the zombie decapitated by Fu Xiefeng, their first of many to come. Other zombies appeared along the way, but all were appropriately dealt with by the main fighters, placating some of the survivors' fear. Soon, however, they saw several buildings collapsed and crushed as if an earthquake had struck the earth during the night, and their gazes were filled with horror and shock. What kind of creature could do such a thing? Survivors were apprehensive about moving forward, and many could not help but stop in fear of what lay ahead. Not to mention the powerless survivors. Even Chun He and Liang Peng had changes in their expressions when they saw the debris of different sizes scattered everywhere. The entire place looked as if several bombs had blown up the foundations of nearby buildings and demolished them in the process. What happened here? Chun He muttered dumbfounded. Although his words were uttered unconsciously, everyone heard him clearly due to how awfully quiet the atmosphere was. "No need to worry." Bai Zemin broke the silence and continued to move forward. "No need to worry." Chun He looked at Bai Zemin's back and wondered if this person had gone crazy. If there was no need to worry about this, then what were they going to worry about? However, another person spoke up just then. "Let's continue. It should be fine." Shangwan Bing Shui gently shook her head and also slowly moved forward. She did not know what to say. Her childhood friend had also gone crazy? Since the world changed, Shangwan Bing Shui's attitude had changed a little compared to his memories. This was something confused for the talented archer. Actually, it wasn't that she had changed. Shengwan Bing Shui was simply adapting to the new world and learning the new rules for survival. Simple as that. Being forced by the fighters who protected both sides of the diamond, Chun He and Liang Peng had no choice but to move forward. As a consequence, all the survivors were forced to walk whether they wanted to or not. After all, they could not survive alone as they lacked the power to do so. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. My God, what? What is that creepy thing? Beetle? How can there be such a big beetle? When the group of more than 20 people arrived at the place where the body of the First Order blazing beetle lay inert, it didn't matter if it was Chun He and Liang Peng or if it was a powerless survivor. They all gasped and took a step back. Seeing the creature's body that was over 3 meters tall and looked similar to a small flesh building, they were all shocked beyond words. Moreover, when they looked at that mighty horn and its long legs, they all felt as if their hair stood on end just imagining having to face something like that. What other monster could have been able to kill this terrifying beast? Liang Peng couldn't help but slowly reach out and touch the elephant beetle's shell, only to be surprised to realize that it felt like he was touching cold metal. Apparently, the monster that fought this elephant beetle cut off a large part of its head. Chinny noticed a large amount of dried blood running down the creature's slashed neck and quickly came to the conclusion. Shengwan Bing Shui simply stood silently as she stared at the giant beetle. Only she knew that the cause of all this was probably the man who was even younger than her and the person who had had the least interaction with the rest of the group. I wonder if the big monster that defeated this First Order beetle is also a monster in bed, Lilith joked as she listened to the human's conversation. She would never miss a chance to tease him, as she loved his reactions. As for the monster that had ended the life of the First Order blazing beetle, Bai Zemin, he almost spits out 2 liters of old blood when he heard the words of the beautiful succubus beside him. This woman really didn't know when to give up. Bai Zemin secretly gritted his teeth, trying not to imagine wild scenes. Ignoring everyone's gaze and not caring about their comments, he walked towards the head of the giant elephant beetle and jumped approximately 3 meters with a loud stomp. Seeing the scene, everyone was amazed and astonished. A 3-meter-high jump was something that in the past would be taken as superhuman, but now it was happening before their very eyes. Fu Xiefeng clenched his fists tightly as he secretly vowed to become powerful enough to perform such feats. Kai Jingyi and the other 2 students also had resolute looks in their eyes, further reinforcing the idea of becoming stronger. "Are you sure it's here?" Bai Zemin whispered softly as he approached the giant beetle's forehead. "Little Zemin, are you doubting, big sister?" Lilith folded her arms, emphasizing her already big attributes even more. "Cough." Bai Zemin quickly turned his gaze away as he secretly cursed her. Without further ado, and under everyone's confused gaze, Bai Zemin wielded the Xianyuan sword, and using the tip easily pierced the beetle's flesh. He cut several centimeters deep until he reached about half a meter before finally stopping. Bai Zemin stuck his right arm in as he put the sword down for a moment and rummaged around before finally pulling his now blood-filled arm back out. However, his attention was on the dark yellow rock the size of a baby's fist in his hands. It with diaresis newbie. The rock was not perfect and had many imperfections in it. However, its glow was extremely enchanting. "That's a First Order soul stone fire element." Lilith nodded and slowly explained, "I had previously overlooked it as it is not valuable to me, but to the current you, it is. Soul stones are used to evolving skills, boost the power of spells cast from the same element, and can even boost treasures as long as you find a person with the blacksmith class and enough ability. In short, soul stones have many other uses that you will slowly learn about." Bai Zemin's eyes glittered when he heard her words. Such a treasure had almost been overlooked, and fortunately Lilith remembered it, or else he would have no tears to cry later. The more time passed, the more he realized how valuable the help that Lilith was giving him was. While he could learn all of this on his own as time went by, the truth was that it was an extremely big advantage in the beginning. Without saying a word, Bai Zemin took out a plastic bag from his backpack and carefully put away the First Order Soul Stone before putting it back into his backpack. Then, He took out an empty bottle and began to draw blood from the beetle. He had not forgotten the requirements to evolve his blood manipulation skill to second order. It was so difficult to defeat the first order blazing beetle, and his life was close to ending on so many occasions that Bai Zemin couldn't even imagine defeating 9 other similar or more powerful creatures. Worse yet, he also needed to defeat a second order monster. One step at a time. One step at a time. Bai Zemin sighed as he continued his work. While everyone was dumbfounded, Shangwan Bing Shui's beautiful eyes glittered, and without saying a word to anyone, she walked away from the group. Bing Shui, where are you going? Chunyi called out to her, but was completely ignored. A few seconds later, and just when Bai Zemin had finished filling several bottles of blood, just in case, Shangwan Bing Shui came back walking like an ice goddess. That woman is smart, Lilith praised as she looked at the silver-haired woman. She went back to look for the body of the mutated dog that was frozen to death 3 days ago to obtain its soul stone. What? Those creatures have too? Bai Zemin was dumbfounded. Not all of them. Lilith shook her head and slowly explained. Even evolved creatures don't necessarily form a soul stone. Besides, the value of an unranked creature is far less valuable than a soul stone from an officially evolved creature. But still, it's valuable to you. F*CK, its mother. Looks like I should go find a mantis corpse when I get the opportunity. Bai Zemin sighed, and after washing his hands with some water, he climbed down from the giant beetle's body. Bang! Suddenly a bang sound forced Bai Zemin to look in that direction, and when he saw the scene, his face became a little strange. Not only he had that strange reaction, Chunyi, the rest of the survivors, and even the cold and indifferent Shangwan Bing Shui had strange looks plastered on their faces. Lilith looked at the scene with a touch of amusement as well, waiting to see what would happen next. No one knew exactly how it happened, as everyone's attention was completely fixed on the mysterious actions of Bai Zemin and the disappearance and appearance of Shangwan Bing Shui. However, at this moment, the little giant Liang Peng was lying on the ground, sitting on his, but while looking at the giant beetle in surprise. What happened? Shangwan Bing Shui broke the awkward silence and asked with a small frown. Liang Peng didn't answer her, and instead jumped off the ground as he shouted loudly, "Damn it! This beetle shell is so hard that even with my strength and hammer, I can't break it." Those survivors who were enduring the urge to laugh when they saw Liang Peng on the ground turned pale when they heard this. Liang Peng had been unconsciously considered as the person with the most physical strength in the whole group, because of his huge hammer and the ease with which he wielded it. However, as one of the strongest in the group, even he could not break through this beetle's defenses. What did it mean not to be able to break through the enemy's defenses? It meant that in the event of a battle, it was only a matter of time before he would have to retreat and defeat or be killed. Then, if a creature on the level of this giant beetle appeared, Liang Peng might have a chance to flee. However, they were all weak people with average stats. If they were left to their fate, it would only be a matter of time before they died miserably. Many young female students could not help but burst into tears again, realizing how dangerous the world was now and how little life was worth. That big man looks like he graduated from a fool's college. Lilith couldn't help but giggle softly as she played with her hair. Bai Zemin frowned slightly at the growing fear of the survivors. At this rate, all his plans would fly out the window before they were even put into action. After hesitating for a moment, Bai Zemin slowly walked towards Liang Peng and stretched out his right hand as he calmly said, "Can you lend me your hammer for a moment?" "What do you want it for?" Liang Peng looked at him suspiciously. His impression of Bai Zemin was not very good at this point after what happened earlier in the gymnasium. "Just to see if I can break through the beetle's defenses." "Don't worry, I'll get it back to you right away." Bai Zemin looked at him seriously and assured him. Liang Peng looked at him as if he was an idiot and was about to say something when suddenly an idea flashed in his mind. With a strange smile, he raised his hammer and handed it to Bai Zemin. "Here." "Thank you." Bai Zemin nodded and stretched his hand forward. When Bai Zemin's hand came into contact with the hammer's handle, Liang Peng scoffed and released his grip. However, the scene of Bai Zemin being sent to the ground by the weight of the hammer did not happen, unlike what Liang Peng was imagining in his mind. Look, Bai Zemin can also hold Liang Peng's big hammer. Not only that, he's doing it with one hand. Some people began to whisper softly amidst the sound of sobbing. Chunyi also blinked in surprise at Bai Zemin's physical strength. On the other hand, Shengwan Bing Shue's blue eyes flashed as if she had finally confirmed her earlier theory. R.A. Epsilon, skull-breaking hammer, normal treasure a hammer, over 2 meters long, created by a metal called asham. It weighs 300 kilograms and is capable of crushing a medium-sized vehicle with ease if its wielder has enough power to wield it. When equipped, plus 20 strength. The hammer was bright blue in color, and while it brought the same amount of strength as Bai Zemin's Xianyuan sword, it was obvious from reading the description and seeing the difficulties of lifting the hammer that his sword was superior in every aspect. Bai Zemin took a big step forward as he lifted the hammer with his single healthy hand, and, after raising his right arm above his head with the hammer pointing towards the sky, his 85 strength points fully burst out as he smashed with all his power downwards. The weight of the hammer together with Bai Zemin's total strength being equivalent to almost 9 normal people before the evolution caused a loud bang as a result of the sudden movement. Boom! After a loud boom and a small shock wave, several students could not help but fall to the ground as they lost their balance when the ground beneath their feet shook from the great weight of the weapon and the force with which it was used. Everyone could not help but suck in a breath of cold air at the thought of what would happen if that strike landed on them. Wouldn't they be crushed into meat paste? Forget about them. Even a normal house would collapse. Bai Zemin looked at the cracks in the giant elephant beetle's shell and nodded, seemingly satisfied. He turned to look at Liang Peng, who was stunned looking at the cracked shell, and said casually, "It really is tough. It looks like I can't break it. Here, thanks for your hammer." After picking up the hammer, Liang Peng couldn't help but reach over and touch the place where Bai Zemin had just banged. Crack, crack, bang. As if that was all that was necessary, when Liang Peng's hand came in contact with the shell, over 50 centimeters of the shell dropped to the ground, revealing the flesh and bloody cracks inside. This wasn't Bai Zemin supposed to be an evolved agility type? Besides, his strength is even superior to Liang Peng's. Chunyi was dumbfounded as he looked at the ground split by the weight of the beetle, the weight of the hammer, and the heavy blow Bai Zemin had just made. Who knows? Even I haven't shown everything yet. Come, an idea occurred to me. Shengwan Bing Shui shook her head slightly before walking towards Bai Zemin and Liang Peng. I guess everyone hides their own secrets. Chunyi nodded. He followed Shengwan Bing Shui, and as he looked at her back, he couldn't help but think under his breath, although I wish you trusted me enough to not have secrets. Then, Bai Zemin looked at Shengwan Bing Shui and said with a somewhat surprised tone, "You want us to use the beetle meat as food?" Shengwan Bing Shui nodded indifferently and continued, "The energy called mana empowers the living beings in the world. Then, it is likely that the giant beetle's meat also contains some remaining mana. I assume that the probabilities that it is beneficial to the human body are high, and it is also a good source of food." Apart from the 4 main leaders, Kai Genie was also present as she had demonstrated good ideas during the early days of the evolutionary apocalypse. Meanwhile, the other survivors were inside the pharmacy looking for and storing as much medicine and medical utilities simple to move. In this world where unwanted surprises awaited in every corner, it was unlikely that social order would be established soon, and the laboratories in charge of producing medicine would not be in operation either. Therefore, it was best to get as much as possible now that they had the opportunity to do so. I think it's a good idea. Chunyi agreed without hesitation. Bai Zemin secretly sneered. As Shengwan Bing Shui's suitor, it was natural for Chunyi to agree with whatever she said. Liang Peng and Kai Jingyi also agreed with her suggestion. Not only could they obtain a source of food, but they could also fortify the body by consuming the monster's meat. After all, the reason for the apocalypse was not a virus. The reason why everything changed was caused by the mana. After some discussion, the 5 people finally came to the conclusion that they should first secure the surroundings and get some tools to take care of the elephant beetle's flesh. In the meantime, the monster's body could only stay here. No one was worried about the meat suddenly going bad because as an energy booster, the mana was doing a good job. 30 minutes later, the group left the practically collapsed area and continued advancing in a northwesterly direction. Although there was still medicine left in the pharmacy, there were two survivors carrying two big backpacks each and some plastic bags full of all kinds of medicines. The next point the group was aiming for was a nearby restaurant in search of food, being this place not only the closest but also the one that was relatively less ringed by buildings in comparison, facilitating the vision of the surroundings, mobility, and preventing them from being trapped in case a large group of zombies appeared without warning. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Inside a 3-story building that used to hold classes in the past, two people were hiding next to the window, looking out at the restaurant 50 meters distant. This building that had previously been used to hold classes had now become a hellhole. Bloodstains were everywhere, tables and chairs turned carelessly over, doors broken. The whole place was as if a hurricane had swept through it during the night, and the only two people alive were these two hidden people. 3 days had passed since the last time they had eaten something, and finally, hunger was beginning to overcome their sense of fear. Yuhan, are you sure you want to do this? Asked one of the two surviving students hiding in the building. Sufun, do we have any other choice? Yuhan, a tall and fit young man in his 20s, replied helplessly. It's been almost 72 hours since I last tasted a bite, and my stomach roars as if a monster is hiding inside. If we don't take the risk now to get some food, when our energy runs out, it will be difficult to even move a single muscle. Sufun's face was filled with helplessness. When had he ever had to go through such suffering? Going hungry was something he had never expected to happen to him. In the past, if he wanted something to eat, a call to a restaurant or a visit to a food center was all he needed to satiate himself. But now all this had disappeared so abruptly that it was hard to digest it all casually. I knew it. If we had stayed with the group, none of this dash. Don't say any more. Sufun was muttering some reproachful words when Yuhan's voice stopped him with a shout that startled him. Yuhan didn't seem to care if the zombies or some other creature had heard his scream as he looked at his fellow survivor with eyes full of fury as he growled. You want to go back to that place? What for? Do you want to become Xiaolong's bitch? Sufun's face turned purple when he heard this, and his heart filled with regret after remembering everything Xiaolong had done during the 3 days they were in his group. Po! Yuhan spat on the ground as he cursed. I'd rather starve to death or be eaten by a zombie than stay with that wild dog surnamed Xiao. It had only been 3 days, but his humanity was already eaten by beasts. Hey, look over there. Sufun suddenly interrupted his companion and quickly tugged at his clothes to urge him to look out of the window. With a face full of anger, grief, and helplessness, Yuhan forced himself to calm down and peeked his head out of the window. However, what he saw shocked him greatly, and he could not suck in a breath of cold air. Who are these people? Are they still human, or are they ghosts? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The group of more than 20 survivors led by Shangwan Bing Shui, Chen He, Liang Peng, and Bai Zemin finally arrived at the nearby street where the restaurant they aimed for this time was located. The walk was slow due to the survivors' fear, so it had been another 10 minutes since they left the place where the first order blazing beetle's corpse lay. How will we do it? Bai Zemin asked casually as he looked at the surrounding 200-plus zombies. It's impossible to avoid a confrontation against them. Chen He surveyed the surroundings before pointing. I think the best idea is to let me lure them out slowly. That way we can annihilate them all much easier after splitting them into smaller groups. Because there were few buildings nearby, the zombies were quite scattered if compared to other places, and the odds of being ambushed by a creature were much lower as well. However, the downside was that due to the lack of buildings, when one zombie was alerted, the others would also notice the nearby life force, and they would start moving in that direction. I get your idea, though. Wouldn't it be easier if we just moved forward and crushed them all? Liang Peng couldn't help but point out. Shangwan Bing Shui looked at him as if he was an idiot. However, she nodded to express her agreement. Underestimating the zombies is not good. But I also feel that it would be easier to simply charge in and finish them off with a single strike to avoid attracting too much attention for too long. Anyway, with the strength of our group, a few hundred zombies shouldn't be any problem. Although Shangwan Bing Shui did not agree with Liang Peng's attitude of underestimating the enemy, she also felt that there was no need to give them importance when they did not deserve it. It was precisely for this reason that she accepted the proposal of the man with the hammer. Then let's get it over with. Bai Zemin didn't even wait for the others and charged forward like a whirlwind. In less than 3 seconds, he had already closed a distance of several meters and found himself in front of the first zombie. His right hand shook gently, and the Xianyuan sword flashed with sharp light for a split second. In the next instant, the zombie's head flew up and created a beautiful arc in the sky as red blood spurted out like a fountain. However, Bai Zemin had already left that place a long time ago, so he could not even smell the scent of blood, let alone see it. You have acquired level 4 normal zombie soul power. You have acquired level 3 normal zombie soul power. You have acquired level 4 normal zombie soul power. Even after losing his velocity boots during his battle against the First Order Blazing Beetle, Bai Zemin's agility was still far superior to that of a normal person and most evolved people. With 76 agility points and being almost 8 times faster than a normal person, Bai Zemin's current speed had reached a point where he could move at approximately 100 kilometers per hour. RAOBs. Unlike most automobiles that needed some time at first to get up to speed, making use of his 85 strength points to push himself with his legs, Bai Zemin could reach a speed of 100 kilometers per hour in just 1 second. His body flickered through the crowd of zombies at astonishing speeds, while small explosions sounded every time one of his legs stomped the ground to propel himself forward. In less than 5 seconds, 10 zombies had fallen to the ground decapitated, and their blood was slowly beginning to accumulate. No matter how many times I see it, that speed is insane. Chunyi couldn't help but force a smile as he looked at the ongoing massacre. Was the help of the 3 of them even necessary here to begin with? Let's go. Shangwan Bing Shui said indifferently as she took a step forward. Her body moved like an ice butterfly, and although her speed was not as high as Bai Zemin's, she was definitely not slow, as even Chunyi and Liang Peng were quickly left behind. With a smooth wave of her hand, 10 small ice bullets appeared out of nowhere, and with another smooth movement gracefully, the 10 ice bullets silently pierced the heads of 10 zombies almost at the same time. Although Shangwan Bing Shui might not be as fast or as strong as Bai Zemin, since these 2 stats of hers were lower than his, her crowd fighting ability was actually much more efficient. While it was true that Bai Zemin was not using his blood manipulation skill, the reality was that Shangwan Bing Shui's ice bullet penetration ability was much higher. In addition, her control over mana was truly spectacular. Therefore, when she joined the battle, she had soon claimed the first place in kill count, with Bai Zemin following closely behind. Chunyi sighed before drawing 3 arrows from the quiver on his back and placing them in his bow. With a simple pull and release of the bowstring, the 3 arrows soared through the skies like dragons and found themselves hitting 3 different targets at exactly the same time. The next instant, another 3 arrows shot out, and 3 more zombies fell lifeless with an arrow stuck exactly in the middle of their foreheads. Although his killing speed was not as high in comparison to Shangwan Bing Shui, it was only slightly lower than the speed at which Bai Zemin, without using any skills, cleared enemies. Chunyi's skill was professional sniper, and as long as he had the necessary weapon, even a fly 2 kilometers away could not escape his shots. Liang Peng snorted and seemed to take the zombie clearing as a competition. With a fierce growl, his body suddenly swelled up and several parts of the clothes he was wearing cracked. Bang! With a mighty stomp that left a crack in the ground beneath his feet, Liang Peng made use of his monstrous strength to boost himself forward, and with a ferocious blow, a zombie was smashed to pieces as flesh and blood splattered everywhere. With another heavy stomp, his body moved in a straight line toward the next target. The survivors, who had quietly stood by Chunyi, who was constantly shooting arrows while Fu Xiefeng hurriedly picked them up, looked at the scene unfolding before their eyes with fervor and hope. Being part of a group with 4 such powerful evolved ones, and with others rising in the near future, the chances of survival were undoubtedly much higher, and the lifestyle they could lead would undoubtedly be a lot better than those without power. Of course, with the new rules in place today, they all knew that they had to work hard to get a better living. But as long as they didn't have to fight a zombie or any other creature, it was okay for them to do any job. That was precisely why these survivors had the courage to go out to carry the food. After about 5 minutes, all the zombies, even the farthest one in sight, had been completely annihilated by the group of 4. Bai Zemin looked on indifferently as the blood of over 200 zombies had accumulated to form a large pool of blood. Although his expression was casual, several thoughts flickered in his mind as he looked at his own status window. The battle had lasted only a few minutes, but Bai Zemin had consumed 5 stamina points. While it was true that 5 points were not much compared to his 180 total points, the reality was that this small scuffle against the zombies had made Bai Zemin realize even more that even if he was strong, he had not reached the point of being able to take on an army of inexhaustible creatures that knew neither the meaning of the word fear nor the meaning of the word pain. A few hundred zombies was fine, but if there were several thousand of them, then even Bai Zemin himself would have no choice but to retreat before his stamina was completely consumed, or else he would end up becoming zombie food. Liang Peng was panting slightly. Obviously, his stamina stats were not particularly high, and he had probably consumed even more than Bai Zemin, whose body had evolved steadily and more evenly. Chinny was picking up some arrows while rubbing his fingers softly, seemingly numb. Moreover, his chest was rising and falling smoothly. Even if he hadn't had to run all over the place, the optimal concentration he had to exert to shoot 3 arrows at the same time with total accuracy was not a simple thing, and the pressure was immense for him. As for Shangwan Bingshui, she was as indifferent as ever, and it was simply impossible to know what was going through her mind. Soon, the group of survivors entered the restaurant and began to inspect what they could and could not take. As they passed by the blood-filled corpses, the smell of iron assaulted their nostrils, and many of them had to be supported by others in order to move forward as their legs had softened to the point where they could fall to the ground at any moment. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What do we do? Sufan whispered quietly as he looked out the window of the small building. Di Yuhan was silent for more than a minute before finally saying, somewhat hesitantly, I think we should try to contact them. What? And what if they also end up being just like Xiao Long and abuse of their power? Sufan didn't seem very willing. Although he had previously asked what to do, he actually hoped not to have to leave this place. Fear and the things he had seen over the past week had turned Su Fun into a frightened person who would rather starve to death than take the slightest risk. Di Yuhan also hesitated a little when he heard this. However, he shook his head and said resolutely, No, I don't think they're the same as that bitch surnamed Xiao. The president of the student association, Shangwan Bingshui, was with them, and she is known for her impartiality. Besides, as a woman, she definitely won't allow such atrocious acts like Xiao Long committed to happen before her. Sufan could not help but nod. He had also recognized Shangwan Bingshui among the survivors. She was an extremely strong and capable fighter with the ability to create ice at will and control it, as if it was something she had been doing all her life. Considering that Shangwan Bingshui was known to be extremely righteous in her decisions in the past, Sufan believed that she would not turn into a beast with human skin so soon. Besides, if we don't go with them, we'll die like starving dogs here. Worse yet, a zombie might appear at night and eat us without us noticing. Di Yuhan shook his head and slowly stood up, fighting the dizziness that struck him as a result of not having eaten anything for 3 whole days. Seeing him walk towards the door, Su Fun gritted his teeth before standing up and following closely behind. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The group of more than 20 survivors found plenty of food in the restaurant. The only unfortunate thing was that most of the food was not durable, as canned food was not particularly popular here. Even so, over 30 kg of rice, noodles, flour, and other miscellaneous items were found that did not need any particular care except to be kept away from moisture. This type of food could last a long time without too much specific care, which was a good thing. Apart from plain food, they also found white meat and red meat. But because the gymnasium's refrigerator was not particularly large, They could only take a few kilos before they had to leave the rest there since defrosted meat would not last long before going bad anyway. After filling approximately 60 backpacks with all kinds of food and drink, the group that had found enough food to feed 100 people for at least another 2 weeks was about to leave when 2 people came into view. Other survivors? Chunyi was surprised and moved forward. However, before he could go too far, Shengwan Bing Shui stopped him and gestured for him to stay in his place. She looked at the 2 people cautiously and asked, "My name is Shengwan Bing Shui. May I know who you are?" S.H. Shengwan, President. "And my name is He Yuhan, a third-year student." He Yuhan could not help but stammer nervously before introducing himself. However, the other young man did not introduce himself and instead stared dazedly at Shengwan Bing Shui with wide eyes. What a beautiful woman! Sufan had never had the opportunity to see Shengwan Bing Shui up close, and this was the first time such an opportunity had come his way. However, when he saw how beautiful she was, he could not help but be stupefied to the point where his brain seemed to have stopped working. Her cold face was like that of an ice angel, and the curves of her body were so lovely that even her dress could not fully cover them. Sufan felt all the lack of energy he felt before disappear just by seeing her. Shengwan Bing Shui couldn't help but furrow her eyebrows slightly, and a look of disgust flashed in her eyes. Although she was already used to such looks, such impudence to stare at her undisguisedly was still unbearable. "Hey, didn't anyone teach you politeness?" A cold voice snapped Sufan out of his daze, and he was startled when he saw Chun-Hee staring at him with icy coldness. Bai Zemin secretly raised an eyebrow. To think that this handsome and kind guy was actually capable of speaking in that tone and giving that kind of look? Interesting, he thought. "I am sorry." Sufan blushed fiercely and quickly apologized before introducing himself. The atmosphere became extremely awkward after what happened earlier, and after the introduction of the 2 newcomers, everyone fell silent. "So," Bai Zemin broke the silence as he looked at the 2 men around his own age and questioned, "What do you guys want? Join our group?" He Yuhan's eyes lit up and he nodded hurriedly. "That's right. We would like to join your group. Although we can't fight, doing jobs like carrying food should be easy." He Yuhan was a smart guy. Previously, he had seen how the survivors worked with the food while the 4 fighters and 3 other people did nothing. Therefore, he had come to the conclusion that this was a group with certain tactical rules. "That's good." Bai Zemin nodded with a small smile. "As long as you're not leeches, you guys are welcome. Even if they are leeches, we can't just let them die casually," Shengwan Bing Shui pointed out. Bai Zemin looked at her briefly before saying lightly, "Well, you'll have to give them some of your food in that case. Personally, I am not anyone's father here. This group was formed to survive and live better, not to drag burdens." "Aren't your words a bit rude?" Chun-Hee couldn't help but frown. To him, Shengwan Bing Shui was the most important person in the world, even more than his family. Therefore, he always cared about everything related to her. Bai Zemin chuckled before looking at him with a touch of sympathy as he said, "Let me see how far you go with your kind-hearted mentality. When your kindness and hesitation become an obstacle, your life won't be the only thing at risk here." Saying that, Bai Zemin's gaze momentarily paused on the silver-haired woman before turning his attention away from this pair of strange friends. Shengwan Bing Shui looked at Chun-Hee and then looked at Bai Zemin, who looked casual. She sighed in her heart. While it was true that Bai Zemin's words were not pleasant to listen to, and he was helping her, the reality was that in this new world, Bai Zemin's words were far more logical. Moreover, while Chun-Hee's personality was almost perfect, this was in the world before the soul record came to this planet. In this new era, such a personality would only attract troubles. It was just that for her, it was not simple to abandon people. She was raised in a very powerful government family, and Shengwan Bing Shui felt it was her responsibility to protect others when in fact it was not. While He Yuhan and Sufan looked at the people who were apparently the leaders, upon more careful observation, they realized that the union of this group was not particularly good. In fact, He Yuhan had subtly noticed that except for Shengwan Bing Shui and Chun-Hee, both famous people on campus, the guy with the sword whose name was unknown to them and the leader of the team in charge of maintaining guard Liangpeng were not particularly close to any person present. Bai Zemin did not bother too much with useless introductions. While these people claimed to be able to do some jobs without danger, what he lacked most now were fighters. As for the matter of Chun He didn't even think about it for a second before forgetting that. Shangwan Bingshui saw that Chun He's expression had turned a little ugly. As for Bai Zemin's expression, he was so indifferent that he seemed to be competing with her. Not wanting the group to have more problems than they already had, she looked at the two foreigners and asked suspiciously, "You too, would you mind telling me how you were able to survive for a whole week? Not only are you not evolved people who absorbed soul power from the soul record, neither are there any particularly safe places here to casually rest for 6 days without food." Bai Zemin's ears twitched softly upon hearing this, and he focused his attention on the two people again. If it wasn't for Shangwan Bingshui's sharp mind, he really wouldn't have cared about something as small as that. But now he really was curious. Besides, he was still hoping to get information about the person who had conspired against him 3 days ago. While Bai Zemin was recovering from his most severe wounds, Lilith had told him that a man who did not belong to the group he was part of had lured many zombies to surround him after he finished his battle to the death against the First Order Blazing Beetle. Back then, if not for Shangwan Bingshui's timely appearance, Bai Zemin might have actually died in that place. It was precisely for this reason that his attitude towards her had become slightly more tolerant as he knew he was in debt. Bai Zemin was always a person who remembered favors, but he also remembered enmities. In the past, a person close to him betrayed him in the cruelest way. As revenge, when Bai Zemin recovered from his depression, he secretly sneaked into that person's bedroom and broke his legs as well as his arms with a metal pipe during the night. How could he forget about someone who intended to turn him into zombie food? Although Bai Zemin did not expect to find such a person from the mouths of these people, pleasant surprises still happened even in hell. He Yuhan's eyes flashed with anger, reproach, sadness, and many complex emotions when he heard Shangwan Bingshui's question. In a low voice, he began to narrate the events that he and Su Fan had witnessed the first few days that the world changed. Before everything became chaotic, He Yuhan was escorting his girlfriend back to the women's dormitory after they had been together most of the day when the storm broke out without warning. Not long after, He Yuhan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach, forcing him to stop his steps in his tracks as he knelt on the ground. The pain only lasted a few seconds. However, when he looked to his side, he was shocked and startled to realize that his pretty girlfriend was standing under the rain in a daze. He Yuhan tried to call out to her, but when he saw her dying white eyes, he was so frightened that he couldn't help but turn away. It was then that chaos erupted. Being the closest building, He Yuhan ran to the female dormitory and locked himself in a room before sealing the entrance with anything useful. A day later, the door was broken down by a good-looking, strong-muscled man named Xiao Long. Xiao Long was a person who had trained hard in some kind of martial arts since childhood, so he somehow managed to kill several zombies, absorb soul power, and evolve. However, his lucky break came when he encountered 2 high-level mutated dogs seriously injured after fighting each other. Taking the opportunity, Xiao Long killed both mutated dogs and directly evolved to level 15. However, Xiao Long was actually a cruel snake who hid his fangs behind his facade of a handsome man. After gaining power, he understood and accepted very quickly that the world and the rules of the past were no longer valid. The only valid rule in this new world was that all rules were written by whoever had the strongest fist. Having understood the whole situation, Xiao Long showed outstanding adaptability. However, he also unleashed all his darkest desires without caring about anything but enjoying the new life. Within his group, Xiao Long had forced everyone to call him king. As king, Xiao Long naturally had his own harem, which was composed of a total of 8 beautiful female students and 2 beautiful female teachers. Among these 10 women, only 4 of them were happy as they could eat the best food and have the backing of someone strong, but the other 6 were unwilling. Unfortunately, these women were weak, and Xiao Long simply forced himself on them. Xiao Long not only forced the women to serve him, but also ate the best food and enjoyed the best treatment available within the group of survivors he had rescued. This had naturally aroused the discontent of many people, for which a group consisting of 5 hot-blooded students stood up to confront him. Too bad, these warm-blooded students were just normal people. How could 5 normal human beings even compare to Qiao Long, who was not only versed in martial arts, but had even absorbed a vast amount of soul power higher than his own? Qiao Long broke the legs of the 5 male students and threw them into a group of zombies, while laughing loudly as he watched them crawl with their hands, and the slow zombies chased after them at similar speeds. In the end, due to the zombies' infinity stamina, the 5 students were eaten alive when they exhausted all their strength. After this event, no one dared to oppose Qiao Long anymore, and he has been living a life of debauchery and uncontrolled while the rest were living the life of cats and dogs. After finishing narrating the story, He Yuhan explained that the reason why he and Su Fan managed to flee was because 3 days ago Qiao Long had returned frightened for some reason and vented all his fear having physical relations with several of his imperial concubines. Making use of this opportunity, they both fled during the night. When the group of survivors heard about Qiao Long's actions, most of them could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. The women shuddered in terror at the thought of leading a life worse than death, and their eyes were filled with pain at the suffering those people were experiencing. He Yuhan's words also served to make everyone realize how fortunate they were. After all, while the group had its own problems, at least everyone was relatively decent, and the 4 strongest leaders kept their sanity seemingly intact. Even the lecherous Liang Peng had not forced anyone to do anything obscene. Suddenly the temperature of the place seemed to drop several degrees all at once, and the survivors could not help but recoil as they looked at the beautiful and usually indifferent Shangwan Bingshui with surprise and trepidation. Even Bai Zemin, Chun He, and Liang Peng had to move several steps away as they looked at her with different reactions. A part of the ground under her feet had frozen completely, while her eyes seemed to burn with fire as she looked at He Yuan. Very slowly, she uttered word by word, "Lead me to the place where Qiao Long is." Her voice was as cold as millennial ice that had been cut off from all warmth and seemed to have forgotten all about emotions. In a building north of the university campus, 4th floor. This place was previously used as an important meeting room by the teachers and directors of the university. Therefore, the decoration was quite elegant. The glass windows were almost 2 meters high, which provided a beautiful view from the 4th floor to the outside. However, while the view was beautiful, the danger was also high, because in this new world, such a place without any protection was definitely not a good place to stay too long. A young man of about 21 or 22 whose face was quite handsome and whose body was very fit was sitting in a leather chair while drinking a glass of whiskey. While students were not allowed to drink alcohol within the university grounds regardless of their age, the teachers had their own stocks, so it was not easy for him to find several bottles. On the young man's lap was a beautiful female student about the same age as him. This young woman smiled every time a young man said something and was clearly trying to curry favor with him in any way possible. This young man was Qiao Long. That little dog, Su Min sure, is arrogant. Qiao Long spat as he clung tightly to the woman's slender waist in his embrace. Does he think that just because he's a teacher he can give me orders? Let's see if now that I've broken his legs he'll learn to be more careful next time. The girl in his embrace shuddered imperceptibly at his words. With a flattering smile, she kissed him and praised, "King Xiao, why bother with little flies? Who doesn't know that your power is the only reason we are still alive? Ha ha! My little Xiao Xiao is still the best." Qiao Long laughed approvingly before giving the beauty a deep kiss. He loved the feeling of dominating the life and death of others. Even the women he had slept with had to call him king, or else they would have to suffer his anger. The girl's name was Xiao Xiao, and she was a 4th-year student. She was one of the few women who was willing to give herself to Qiao Long of her own free will. She just wanted to survive and lead a better life. Moreover, although she was scared of Qiao Long and his wild acts, Xiao Xiao had also become accustomed to giving orders and looking down on others with arrogance after only 6 days of apocalypse. Bang! The office door was opened with a bang, and one of Xiaolong's cronies walked in with a pale face as he urgently shouted, "King, those two little bitches Su Fun and He Yuhan are back." Xiaolong was about to curse this student for interrupting his moment of happiness. However, when he heard his words, his eyes flashed viciously. Those two puny ants finally couldn't stand the hunger. Just wait until I get my hands on them, and let me watch them run away again. Xiaolong gently pushed the woman he was about to have a good time with, and stood up as he walked to the exit. The student buddy was surprised, and quickly followed him as he hurriedly said, "King, those two puny ants are not alone. There is a group of survivors of about 20 or 30 people, and among them is the #1 beauty of our university." Xiaolong's footsteps stopped abruptly, and he looked at the student with red eyes. "Is that right?" The student naturally understood the meaning behind that question. After so many days of seeing Xiaolong's arrogant and confident attitude, this student knew that he was not afraid of crowds. "It's really her. I saw her with my own eyes. Shengwan Bingshui was together with that pretty face Chun, he and 2 other guys I don't know." A huge smile appeared on Xiaolong's face, and he walked out, taking long strides as he daydreamed about delighting with the body of the arrogant woman that countless men were dreaming about. Even teachers were secretly looking at the beauty Shengwan Bingshui. As for Chun He and the other 2 strangers, Xiaolong ignored them completely. Chun He came from a powerful family. This was something that everyone knew well, and it was also for this reason that no one dared to touch Shengwan Bingshui, thinking that he was her safeguard. However, few knew that she never trusted the protection of anyone but herself. But what good did it do to have a powerful family now? Weren't they all in the same situation? Xiaolong was confident that as long as he did not meet that monster who killed the beetle, there was no one capable of defeating him in this university. However, that guy should be dead or at least seriously injured right now. Xiaolong thought as he headed for the exit of the building. That night 3 days ago, Xiaolong was terrified when he saw the giant elephant beetle. His whole being was screaming to run away and not to appear before that creature. However, to Xiaolong's surprise and horror, one person actually dared to face that beetle and actually emerge victorious. Xiaolong did not even dare to think about what would happen if that person appeared before him one day as his enemy. Therefore, taking the opportunity of the fact that this person was injured after defeating the elephant beetle, Xiaolong attracted a large number of zombies to surround such a person. In fact, Xiaolong was so scared at that time that he did not even dare to approach and left after attracting more than 100 infected undead. No, but Xiaolong did not believe that that unknown person would have survived, and even if he survived his injuries, should be critical considering that fierce battle in the middle of the storm. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Bai Zemin and the rest of the survivors advanced under He Yuhan's guidance. Although He Yuhan was scared and did not want to see Xiaolong again for the rest of his life if possible, under the death stare Shengwan Bingshui was giving him, he did not dare to say no and could only lead the way obediently. "Bingshui, why don't you calm down a moment?" Chunyi walked beside his best friend, and at the same time, the only woman he had ever loved, trying to appease her with a soft voice. Unfortunately, all his efforts failed miserably. Shengwan Bingshui's gaze was fixed on the road before her, and every time a zombie dared to appear at her vision, it was miserably slaughtered even before it could growl twice. Bai Zemin was quite surprised. Although in the past he was indifferent to everyone and did not pay attention to anyone in particular, the reality was that it was impossible not to know Shengwan Bingshui unless one was not a student or teacher of this university. However, that cold and indifferent Shengwan Bingshui from the rumors, and whom he had known for a week, seemed to have disappeared at this moment. While she was still cold, that elegant coldness had disappeared and been replaced by deadly coldness that no one would be willing to get too close of. Sensing Shengwan Bingshui's extremely bad mood, none of the survivors dared to say a word and continued carrying the heavy backpacks and bags full of food and drink. "It's here." Hesitantly, He Yuhan pointed to a 4-story building 1 street away, and everyone stopped after hearing his words. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Shengwan Bing Shui nodded indifferently and slowly walked forward with Chun He following close behind. Liang Peng also followed a little behind. After all, as a member of this group, Shengwan Bing Shui was an important asset, and Liang Peng was not willing to see her die, as it would mean his own life would be harder from then on. As for Bai Zemin, he mingled among the survivors, and in a low voice that no one could hear, he whispered, "Hey Lilith, is this the guy who tried to kill me 3 days ago?" "Indeed, he's the one who attracted that crowd of zombies." Lilith nodded with a casual smile as she floated several meters above the ground. With eyes full of curiosity, she looked at Bai Zemin and asked, "What will you do?" "Just wait and see," Bai Zemin replied indifferently. However, his eyes flashed with a hint of coldness imperceptible to the naked eye. "You dare to try to kill me using the zombies? I will show you the consequences of having failed then." "Oh, it's really you, Shengwan Bing Shui," Xiao Long exclaimed ecstatically as he opened his arms wide. His eyes glittered with naked desire as he gazed at the curves of the beautiful woman before him. Shengwan Bing Shui was undoubtedly the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his entire life. Only such a woman was truly worthy of being his queen. "You are Xiao Long, the leader of this group, who calls himself king?" Shengwan Bing Shui's voice was bone-chilling as she looked at him coldly. "That's right." Xiao Long did not contradict and confirmed as he nodded. He inspected first Chun He and then Liang Peng before saying, "I see that you're also good fighters. How about joining this king? I can promise you the best treatment and the best-looking women. Above all, and only below one me." Chun He looked at him as if he was an idiot. This person surely lost his brain, just like the zombies. Liang Peng seemed tempted by the offer when he heard the word women, but finally sighed as he muttered, "What a pity," over and over again. Shengwan Bing Shui was clearly not in the mood to listen any nonsense. She waved her right hand gently, and 2 ice pikes appeared floating above her head before shooting out towards Xiao Long's arms. She clearly intended to disable him immediately. "Since you won't agree to be mine for good, then I'll make you my personal bitch when I get my hands on you." Xiao Long snorted in response. He was already expecting things not to go his way, so he was secretly on his guard. "Break!" Xiao Long shouted and punched a fist forward. Bang! Xiao Long's punch seemed to be strong enough to make the air in front of him bang noisily. As if an air cannon had formed after that blow, Shengwan Bing Shui's 2 ice pikes were shattered by the strong pressure. With a stomp, Xiao Long's body shot forward at full speed while staring at Shengwan Bing Shui and having identified her as a ranged fighter. Shengwan Bing Shui's expression remained unchanged. With a wave of her hand, 10 ice pikes appeared above her head and shot towards the enemy. Seeing the 10 ice pikes approaching at full speed, Xiao Long's face changed slightly, and he was forced to jump to the side. He had barely rolled on the ground and dodged 3 pikes when the other 7 changed course and continued to pursue him. In response, Xiao Long clenched both fists and launched a flurry of punches forward. Bang, 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 bang. In a moment, the 7 ice pikes were crushed into tiny pieces of ice that fell powerlessly on the ground. In retaliation, Xiao Long clenched both fists and fiercely punched forward while glaring at Chun He and Liang Peng. The air blasted noisily, and 2 air cannons shot out toward the 2 men who apparently had no intention of participating. The 2 men were stupefied. Neither of them expected that this person would suddenly attack them when he was fighting another person. Shengwan Bing Shui's face finally had a slight change upon seeing this. Without delay, she waved both hands, and 2 thin walls of ice appeared in front of the 2 men. Bang! Bang! The 2 thin walls of ice were crushed by the force of the air cannon, but they managed to stop the sneak attack successfully. Unfortunately, Shengwan Bing Shui had spent a lot of mana to create those 2 ice walls. After all, her ice maker skill was a first-order skill, and she did not have perfect control over it. Xiao Long laughed and charged forward as he took the opportunity of lack of attacks. Damn bastard! Chun He blushed in embarrassment and couldn't help but curse. If it wasn't for Shengwan Bing Shui, he might have been seriously injured or even killed by the previous attack. But worst of all was that because of him, she had to face incoming troubles. With swift and expert movements, Chun-Yi pulled out 3 arrows from the quiver on his back, and with fiery anger, shot the 3 arrows towards Xiaolong. "Are you still trying to be soft? You trash!" Xiaolong looked at Chun-Yi and sneered. With a strong punch, the 3 arrows aimed at his limbs were easily torn apart. Shangwan Bing Shui crafted 20 ice bullets and shot them all forward at the same time. She no longer seemed to care about her enemy's life, as many attacks targeted areas like the head and heart. Xiaolong also noticed the change in the pattern of enemy attacks and immediately realized that, to his frustration, he was actually weaker than her. With no other choice, he was forced to change his strategy. While Shangwan Bing Shui thought that Xiaolong would continue charging toward her, he suddenly turned his body and charged towards Chun-Yi, who was still shocked by the ease with which his attack was crushed. "Chun-Yi, watch out!" Shangwan Bing Shui couldn't help but exclaim as she built up a wall of ice in front of him. "Ha ha! You fall, little beauty!" Xiaolong laughed out loud like a lunatic whose plan succeeded. A whirlwind of wind appeared under his feet, and his speed soared to new heights. Under everyone's dumbfounded gaze, Xiaolong dashed toward Shangwan Bing Shui once again. However, she had no time to create more attacks this time, since she was still dazed by what had just happened. Powerless, she could only watch as his hand stretched forward in an attempt to catch her. "How dare you, you damn brat!" An enraged roar sounded from the side, followed by a loud pressure. Xiaolong's face turned pale when he saw a huge hammer just a meter away from his head. If that blow reached him, forget about being seriously injured. His head would undoubtedly explode into several hundred pieces. Surprisingly, instead of backing away, Xiaolong gritted his teeth and punched his fist forward. Boom! A powerful air cannon collided with the huge hammer, stopping the attack and giving Xiaolong time to retreat and change direction. At the same time, Liang Peng's timely interruption ended up buying Shangwan Bing Shui the necessary time. Among the crowd of survivors, Bai Zemin looked at everything coolly. What a surprise! Lilith's voice sounded beside him. To think that human actually has a skill as strong as your blood manipulation. No, his skill is weaker. Bai Zemin shook his head softly and replied in a whisper. Good. It's true that in advanced stages your skill is stronger. But how do you know? Lilith looked at him with a raised eyebrow, waiting for his answer. Instinct. Bai Zemin smiled slightly. Bah! Lilith rolled her eyes. Xiaolong was really strong, although not as much as Shangwan Bing Shui. He was powerful. His skill had already been discovered by Bai Zemin and was indeed very strong. However, it was strong in the initial stages. Bai Zemin knew that his blood manipulation skill was going to become extremely horrifying in the future. On the other hand, Xiaolong's skill would only become more and more insignificant in comparison. Why don't you go and finish him off? Lilith was getting a little bored and apparently wanted to see some blood. Although I know I am strong, in my battle against the blazing beetle the reason I survived and emerged victorious was because of my intelligence and not my strength, as I was clearly weaker. Bai Zemin narrowed his eyes, and a strange glint flashed deep inside it. Now, we are all in the same group, but in the future, it won't necessarily be like that. Lilith's eyes widened, and she looked at him with noticeable surprise as she asked in amazement, Are you studying the strength and weaknesses of each of them? Bai Zemin smiled faintly, but did not reply. Instead, he focused on the movements of Shangwan Bing Shui, Chun-Yi, and Liang Peng. Know what you are capable of doing, learn about your enemy, plan, and you will emerge invincible in every battle. This was a proverb that Bai Zemin had been fond of since he was young. Although he and they were currently allies, Bai Zemin had already suffered an assassination attempt from a person he did not even know. Bai Zemin had no desire to be stabbed in the back ever again in his life. Once in the past was enough. Better safe than sorry, he whispered to himself. As she looked at Bai Zemin acting as if he was a computer, Lilith couldn't help but feel even a bit of pity in the midst of her happiness. She was happy that he thought that way, since his survival would be much smoother and the probability of him dying would be much lower. However, she also felt pity as he was changing too fast. Compared to that young man she had seen for the first time, that young man who had been scared when he saw his first zombie and even screamed when he saw the level 5 Big B. The current, he was a lot more cold and cold-hearted. Alpha, what skill did he acquire? Lilith was going crazy trying to find out, but she couldn't get to the answer she was looking for. It was simply impossible for him to change so much in just 6 days. Therefore, he must have acquired a powerful passive skill, but with side effects as a consequence. As Lilith looked at him with complicated emotions, while Bai Zemin analyzed the movements of each evolved, the battle continued. Shangwan Bing Shui was clearly stronger, but Xiao Long was extremely cunning and used Chunhe's safety to force her to stop her ice attacks and erect defensive walls, which was causing her to expend a large amount of mana. Xiao Long naturally knew that the two of them were friends since they were young. After all, Shangwan Bing Shui and Chun-He were both well-known characters before the apocalypse. Therefore, he used this against them. Chun-He was strong, but his forte was in ranged attacks. However, every time he wanted to move away, Xiao Long would appear before him at higher speeds than him, so he was completely and utterly suppressed. As for Liang Peng, although he possessed the power to threaten Xiao Long's life, his agility was simply too low to catch up with him. Therefore, Liang Peng stood beside Shangwan Bing Shui without allowing Xiao Long a chance to get close. Bai Zemin, what are you doing? You still don't plan to move? Shangwan Bing Shui finally couldn't help but get frustrated and shouted out loud while looking back. She really intended to kill Xiao Long, but he was like a slippery cockroach running around. As if that wasn't enough, she had exhausted almost all of her mana protecting Chun-He, and her mood had turned extremely ugly at this moment. Xiao Long's face changed when he heard Shangwan Bing Shui's words, and he hurriedly retreated while making use of 2 air cannons under his feet. Currently, he was already in huge trouble. If another evolved appeared, then it was likely that he would have no choice but to retreat. Sure, I just thought you wanted to do it by yourself. Bai Zemin walked out with casual steps as he looked at Xiao Long with a smile that wasn't a smile. It's you. When Xiao Long saw him, his pupils contracted to the size of a needle, and he couldn't help but gasp. In fact, he was shocked to the point where he couldn't help but yell out. Although it was dark that night, and Xiao Long had not been able to make out Bai Zemin's appearance, the black coat and the sword in his hand were something Xiao Long would never forget no matter what. I'm glad you remember me. Bai Zemin nodded with a smile, as if greeting an old friend. Since Xiao Long wasn't playing dumb, it was easier for him to not have to beat around the bush. You know this scumbag? Shangwan Bing Shui looked at Bai Zemin cautiously and walked away from him. Bai Zemin looked at her, and instead of answering, he asked, that stormy night 3 days ago, the reason those zombies surrounded me was because of him. Do you think I know him or not? At first, she was surprised. However, she soon let out a small sigh of relief. Since Xiao Long had planned to kill him, that meant they were not friends. If Bai Zemin and Xiao Long were friends and joined forces, then things would be difficult. Bang! Xiao Long's face turned pale, and without even a moment's hesitation, he turned around to flee. The ground under his feet cracked slightly due to the air cannons, and he sped away. The people in Xiao Long's group were shocked to the point of not being able to believe what they were seeing. He, who was arrogant as hell and called himself king, was actually running away like a cowardly chicken. But how could Bai Zemin allow him to come and go at will? Where do you think you're going? Suddenly, Xiao Long's footsteps stopped abruptly. A moment later, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood and knelt on the ground while clutching his stomach, growling lowly. Bai Zemin approached step by step and without haste. At this point, he didn't mind showing off a bit of his main skill. Anyway, it was unlikely that anyone would be able to identify it with such little testing. Arriving next to Xiao Long, Bai Zemin squatted down and with his healthy hand grabbed him by the hair, forcing his head up and to look directly into his eyes. Xiao Long couldn't help but grimace in pain. However, when he looked into Bai Zemin's eyes, he was so startled that for a moment he forgot the pain he was feeling. Shangwan Bing Shui's eyes were cold by nature, and it was as if all her life she had had that frozen gaze with no sign of emotion. But the coldness emanating from Bai Zemin's gaze was brimming with a cruelty that seemed to come from every fiber of his being. A little bird told me that you like to play with zombies? Sounds interesting. A little bird told me that you like to play with zombies? Sounds interesting. Hearing the words that Bai Zemin had just spoken, the crowd of people inside the building who were silently observing the battle and the survivors who were guided by He Yu Han could not help but gasp. What did Bai Zemin mean by play with zombies? Of course they all understood. How could they not understand the intention behind those words? After all, while the group of survivors led by Qiao Long had seen him throw live people to the zombies, the group led by Bai Zemin and the others had heard the story of the events less than an hour ago. Chenyi's face turned a little ugly when he heard this. Even now, he couldn't just casually go and kill a person. Being raised in a family with a military background, Chenyi always believed, and still now, did believe that criminals should face the law. This person is crazy? He's joking, isn't he? Chenyi asked, dumbfounded. Who knows? Shangwan Bing Shui replied absently and without much interest. Currently, her thoughts were on something else. What happened just now? Why did Qiao Long, who was acting all-powerful just a moment ago, suddenly become as weak as an insect and coughed up a mouthful of blood? Shangwan Bing Shui was trying to find answers to these questions while looking at Bai Zemin with eyes filled with doubt. Bing Shui, are you okay with this? Your family won't accept it either if they find out, considering how many witnesses there are here. Chenyi hesitated for a moment before pointing. From his point of view, while it was true that the world had changed, it was impossible that the army could not defeat the zombies considering how slow they were. It was only a matter of time before everything regained a certain level of normalcy, and even if the world could no longer return to the way it was only natural to Chun-He that the laws would be enforced. Shangwan Bing Shui looked at him a little exasperated. She knew that Chun-He was saying those words to stop Bai Zemin out of kindness, but that kindness in this world without rules was somewhat annoying. Then you want me to kill him? She asked casually, as if killing a person was not difficult at all. With my family backing me up, even if I kill him in front of so many people, it should be fine. What? That's not what I meant, and you know it. Chenyi couldn't help but look at her as if she was crazy. Anyway, that scum will die in one way or another. Shangwan Bing Shui shook her head before looking at Qiao Long with disgust and hatred. Such a scum of man. That's why they shouldn't exist to begin with. Chenyi was slightly dumbfounded as he heard her final words. In the end, he could only sigh as his eyes flashed with complex emotions. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On the other hand, while the survivors were looking at him with terror, and while Chun-He and Shangwan Bing Shui had different thoughts about the current situation, Bai Zemin was dragging Qiao Long on the ground, as if he was a broken rag. Let me go, you F***king bastard. Qiao Long roared furiously and tried to activate his skill to free himself. However, cough. Qiao Long felt all his internal organs clench. It was as if they were about to break into pieces. In the end, he couldn't help but cough out a mouthful of blood for the second time. What's going on? Qiao Long was scared. The pain was so great that it was about to become unbearable. You can't activate your air manipulation skill, right? Bai Zemin questioned indifferently as he continued to drag Qiao Long on the ground. Bai Zemin's hand was like a pair of unbreakable iron pincers that clung tightly to Qiao Long's head, unwilling to let go. What? How do you know the name of my skill? Qiao Long looked at him as if he was looking at a ghost in broad daylight. About that, Bai Zemin replied unhurriedly as he stopped and smiled slightly at the group of 10 zombies slowly approaching. Due to the sound of the previous battle, some creatures were attracted, so Bai Zemin hadn't even walked 30 meters before a group of zombies came into view. While you were fighting before, I noticed that you were trying to hide your skill by using your fists. Bai Zemin explained as he released his grip on Qiao Long. Qiao Long wanted to take the opportunity to run away, but before he could react, Bai Zemin had already struck with his right leg. Arg, you damn bastard. I'll kill you. I swear to God, I'll kill you. Qiao Long cried out in pain as he felt the bones in his leg breaking into pieces. His eyes widened as he glared at Bai Zemin as a bloodthirsty demon. New ES. Bai Zemin did not even react to his threat and kicked his other leg again with all his strength. The bones of Qiao Long's other leg were also crushed into countless pieces, and his sharp cry of pain echoed everywhere. As I was telling you before, Bai Zemin looked at him with a smile and explained, although you were hiding your skill well, you made a very big mistake when you boosted your speed. That's when I realized that your skill was similar to mine. Bai Zemin ignored the look of hatred, fear, and surprise on Qiao Long's face. Instead, he looked at Lilith with a smile and said casually, "You see, even if there is air in the entire atmosphere, and this trash's skill is stronger than my blood manipulation at the beginning, what good is it if he can't activate it? You." Lilith looked at him as if he was a monster. Not only was Bai Zemin many times stronger than his actual level, but he did not get carried away by that strength and instead analyzed each situation carefully in detail before stepping forward. This was extremely alarming, because the higher existences were precisely superior beings to the lower existences. Everyone disdained them and gave them no importance. However, Lilith opened her eyes again as she looked at the glint of indifference in Bai Zemin's gaze. "Bai Zemin, what skill did you obtain back then?" She finally couldn't help but ask. "That's a secret for now," he replied as he looked at the zombies approaching step by step. "You do realize that your behavior isn't normal, right?" Lilith frowned a bit worriedly. "If I'm not mistaken, this should be the first time you're going to kill a person, but your hand didn't even flinch for a second, and your gaze doesn't even have a wave in it. Do you think at the past you would act like this?" Bai Zemin was a bit surprised when he heard this and frowned as he realized that Lilith was a bit right. Indeed, he did not feel that he was doing anything wrong, nor did he feel fear for what he was about to do. Was this the effect of the Stoneheart skill? Bai Zemin analyzed the situation. However, he shook his head gently and replied indifferently, "It doesn't matter. This person wanted to kill me and separate me from my loved ones. Therefore, I will kill him. Is it wrong?" "No, it's not that it's wrong." Lilith didn't know what to answer. Was it wrong? Of course it wasn't wrong, and she was happy that he understood that. However, her happiness couldn't help but be dampened by the realization that at this point he was beginning to look more like a machine calculating advantages and disadvantages than a human being. From this point of view, the current Bai Zemin was not much different from the higher existences. Qiao Long screamed in terror when he felt the zombies' closeness and their growls. He tried to activate his air manipulation skill, but all his tries were crushed by the sickening pain he felt every time Bai Zemin activated his blood manipulation skill. "As long as it is for my sake and the sake of my loved ones, even if I have to kill hundreds of people, I can kill without remorse," Bai Zemin said indifferently and slowly walked away while muttering to himself as if to reinforce that thought even more. "Do not come close to me, you damn creatures." Qiao Long crawled backwards with his hands as he activated his air manipulation skill, demonstrating that the use of his fists earlier was only to hide the true nature of his skill, just as Bai Zemin had said before. Bang! 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 3 air cannons blew off the heads of 3 zombies, and the ground soon became a bloody mess. Immediately afterwards, 3 other oversized air cannons exploded the heads of 3 other nearby zombies. However, to Qiao Long's horror, when he wanted to create another 3 air cannons, he realized that he had no more mana left. In their previous battle, Shengwan Bingshui had not been the only one who had consumed a lot of mana. Qiao Long was the same. Due to the sharp and dangerous attacks that she was making with the intention of killing him, Qiao Long was forced to push his skill to the maximum possible, and unfortunately to him, Shengwan Bingshui's Ice Maker skill was his perfect counter, as she could create walls of ice to defend against his cannons and ice bullets or ice pikes to keep him away from her. Qiao Long's air manipulation skill allowed him to control the air near him, but unlike Bai Zemin's blood manipulation skill, Qiao Long could not control the air inside people. Each skill had its pros and cons. However, both were very powerful. The mana consumption of powerful skills is also much higher than normal. Bai Zemin's voice, getting farther and farther away, reached Qiao Long's ears. Under his terrified and panicked gaze, a zombie reached forward and grabbed his head before taking a sharp bite on his face. "Arg! It hurts. It hurts so much. Another zombie knelt down beside him and bit on his arm, tearing off a large chunk of flesh in the process. Help me. I'm sorry for what I did before. A third zombie latched onto his other arm and began to eat his hand, tearing off 2 fingers with a single bite. I'm willing to be your dog. I'll work like a mule to death for you. Xiao Long's desperate screams echoed everywhere, causing his voice to bounce between the nearby buildings, creating a great high-pitched echo that shook the eardrums of all those who heard it. Under the care of 4 zombies, Xiao Long was bitten all over to the point where his body had become a mess of blood and flesh. His screams of pain and agony stopped when one of the zombies bit his throat. The survivors shuddered in fear as they witnessed such a horrific scene with their own eyes. Something that should only happen in movies, novels, or fantasy books was actually happening before them without any censorship and leaving nothing to the imagination. Everyone's gaze was unconsciously directed at Bai Zemin, who was about 20 meters away. However, none of them dared to look at him for more than a few seconds before hurriedly looking away, as if they were afraid that he would suddenly throw them into the zombies. Even the teachers inside the building where the group rescued by Xiao Long was in the past were looking at Bai Zemin with surprise and trepidation. ANS. Who would have thought that this young man could actually be so cruel? But the most surprising thing was that his expression was so indifferent, as if what he had just done was none of his business. However, there were some people who looked at Xiao Long's death with endless hatred, and when their gazes fell on Bai Zemin's back, that hatred turned to gratitude. These people were the women who had suffered from Xiao Long's tyranny. After being abused and objectified for almost a week, these women were willing to do anything to get revenge. Too bad, they were too weak to do anything about it. But Bai Zemin's appearance was similar to the sun rising after such a long time of darkness. How ironic this guy, who could have been one of the strongest powers of the mankind in the future to fight against the different races, actually ended up dying at the hands of another human less than a week after acquiring his powers. Lilith commented with a casual smile as she watched Xiao Long being slowly devoured. She was obviously already used to such sights. In fact, Xiao Long was destined to be someone great, and with his skill air manipulation as his mainstay, as long as he didn't encounter monsters of a higher order, surviving shouldn't be much of a problem for him. That bright destiny vanished that thunderstorm night 3 days ago when he tried to kill me. Bai Zemin finished as he took a step forward. Swoosh, 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 making 4 slashes at lightning speed. 4 heads flew through the air right before falling to the ground and rolling a couple of times before finally stopping. Ignoring the approaching zombies, Bai Zemin crouched down next to Xiao Long's shattered corpse and couldn't help but frown slightly at the incredibly gruesome and disgusting sight. Suppressing the urge to vomit, he began to rummage through the body before finally finding some interesting things. Hurricane Necklace. Rare grade treasure contains great wind-like elemental power inside. Once a day, it can release a hurricane in a straight line and send nearby targets flying. When equipped, Magic plus 10. Draftbane Dagger. Normal grade treasure, an easy-to-conceal and easy-to-carry dagger created with a metal called Harbonite. Is harder than steel and lighter than cork. When equipped, Strength plus 5. Although there were only 2 treasures in Xiao Long's body, there were 2 new items for Bai Zemin. By defeating human powerhouses, it was not only possible to acquire soul power and experience, just like with monsters, but also to obtain all the items that the loser had gathered and accumulated. Of course, while it was true that the higher the level of the enemy and the greater the number of treasures they possessed turn a person into a walking treasure trove, the reality was that defeating such beings was also proportionally difficult. Moreover, although the current Bai Zemin had no qualms about killing people, he did not consider himself a mad machine who killed people just to gather a couple of treasures. As long as someone did not obstruct his path, Bai Zemin would not consider that person his enemy, and therefore would not attack them either. However, just because Bai Zemin thought that way did not mean that everyone thought that way. There would definitely be people who would hunt humans to take their belongings. Bai Zemin's face suddenly changed, but he soon relaxed. Swoosh! An ice bullet shot out from the distance and accurately hit the head of Qiao Long's corpse. Surprisingly, after penetrating the brain, the ice bullet released a terrifying amount of frost that froze practically the entire head in and turned it into an ice cube. Even though that scum's life was over after being devoured by those zombies, he could still become one of them. A light voice sounded a few meters away. Raising his head slightly, Bai Zemin saw Shangguan Bing Shui approaching. Behind her, Chun-He and Liang Peng were looking at him with different emotions, but both shared one thing, a touch of fear and wariness. Clearly what Bai Zemin had just done had shocked the two men too much, and his figure had been etched in their minds as someone dangerous.